Blacksmith of the Apocalypse. By Arcuser. Chapter 441. Offering Home. The snake seemed amicable, but Seth could feel an aura similar to the throne angel from her. It meant the snake was by no means weak. As a local deity, as the demon had mentioned, her power might be just below a god. Seeing the difference in level, Seth bet on the cuteness of her junior Tatzel and making a good first expression by being honest. He described their situation and the reason they were in this world. "So, you are looking for the remnants of that old coot?" The white snake scoffed. "Do you maybe know about it?" Seth asked carefully. "Of course. I was still a snakelet like Tatzel here, when that dragon turned the world upside down. I lived through the chaos that followed his conflict with the Empire and their mutual destruction." "Does that mean the story about the dragon and the Empire is true?" he asked to ascertain whether what they found out about their destination was true. The snake mused for a moment before nodding. "From what I heard, the dragon's tower is the only thing that survived that fight unharmed. Although the dragon won the battle, he was left to die from his injuries. If there is a place that fits your description, then it's the dragon tower. But you should be careful, it won't be easy to get anything from in there." "Why did they even fall out with each other, Senior?" the Emuji asked innocently. "Dragon greed. At least that is what the rumors said back then. As an Emuji you must also feel it, right? The draconic urges to possess valuables and collect treasures. For some dragons, it worsens with age. From what I heard, the youngest prince of the Empire dared to take a gold coin from the dragon's hoard. Things escalated from there." The group fell in awkward silence as nobody knew how to continue from there. Finally, the deity broke the silence. "Anyway, what brought you here, when you were aiming for the old capital?" The blacksmith gladly took the chance to talk about the team's journey up to their flight from Ahaz. "What happened to your friends?" "We got separated. It's actually the reason why we came here. It will become clear once I finish." When the blacksmith mentioned their encounter with the core worm and their hectic chase, he could hear a small regretful sigh from the snake and halted his narration. "Oh, please don't pay attention. It's a shame a powerful being like him fell to the mad god's curse. Did you know the worm, Senior White?" Tatzel derailed the conversation. "I met him only twice or thrice in the past. However, he was tremendously powerful. If even he became a rampaging monster because of the sun god. I do no longer regret spending much of my power to erect the mist barrier. Seeing you three save, must mean it is keeping my people safe." Seth was able to hide it, but Ellie's face fell when she realized who her people were. The slime rancher's expression perturbed the snake. The blacksmith scratched his head. This wasn't going to be easy, no matter how he phrased it. He put together the most diplomatic way to tell her that all her people were dead, most likely because of them. He took a deep breath and... "Do you mean the undead in the city below, Senior?" Tatzel blurted it out. "You undead? Does that mean my people are?" "I'm sorry, Senior, but it seems that somebody killed and resurrected them while you were asleep." The white snake stared at them, and a terrifying aura rose from her. "It wasn't us. To be honest, our airship was brought down here when we were crossing the fog in an attempt to lose the core worm. We fought our way out of the city and became here because Tatzel told us you were the owner of the fog. We hoped you could help us find our friends." Seth blurted out the rest of their story in a hurry. The dangerous aura weakened a little. "Just who would dare to touch my people?" she asked wistfully. "Did you grant them rest?" "We didn't have any other option than to fight," Seth answered apologetically. "It's okay." The snake slumped down a little. Its anger made way for a feeling of deep sorrow. She had spent so much energy on creating the mist barrier to protect her believers that she fell into slumber. During this slumber, her followers were killed and desecrated. Seth understood her loss a little, but he tried not to dwell on these kinds of feelings. "What will you be doing now?" he asked concerned. "I will mourn their death and then, find a different way to live." There was a glint in his eyes when Seth heard the last words. This was a deity that created a giant bank of fog to protect her followers. Her good character was guaranteed. The blacksmith pulled out a silver ring, made from artificial adamantium. Its sigil showed a simplified tower below a stylized arch. "If you ever need a place to stay, I could offer Senior a home. Please take this ring as a sign of friendship." The snake's eyes shone with surprise and greed when her eyes fell on the ring. Even if she was not part of the system, she could easily see the quality of the material and the workmanship behind the ring. "I will accept your offering," she said humbly. The ring floated out of Seth's hand and vanished in the water close to the snake's body. Then the snake slithered out of the water and revealed more and more of her body. At the same time, she started shrinking. Before the surprised eyes of her visitors, she took on a humanoid shape. She was still covered in white scales and wore a white robe. Her face was fair and androgynous. Seth was convinced she would be a hit for men and women alike. Whoa! Ellie was in awe. Wow! Mom, do you think I can do the same as Senior White when I grow up? Tatzel asked excitedly. Okay, I'm ready. I will help you find your friends and send you off, she said matter-of-factly, completely ignoring their stares as she took the lead on the way down the stairs. What happened to mourning? Was an expensive gift enough to stave off her sorrow? Seth thought for a moment, but when he observed her face, it was clear that she was not as upbeat about helping them, as she made it seem. Maybe she just took it as a chance to take a look for herself. Maybe there was still hope that somebody survived. Seth couldn't blame her for having this hope, after all, for all he knew there could be survivors. Somewhere. Senior White finally stopped at the foot of the stairs, where they managed to catch up with her. The group found her rather confused staring into the distance. From the fog in that direction, they saw Brock being led and shoved towards them by a group of blobs. "Are they yours?" she asked, perplexed as if she had never seen a slime in her life. "They are my babies. Aren't they cute?" Ellie bragged and went forward to embrace the slime in the front. Hugging the jelly drop, she came back and offered it to Senior White. "Here. Try holding one. They are cute, super soft, and really soothing to pet," she stated. Seth could not help to add if one ignored that they were dirt, trash, monster, and corpse-devouring sacks of highly corrosive acid in his mind. He wouldn't say it out loud. It would hurt Ellie's feelings. Although it was true. Awkwardly the snake received the undulating blob. A slight smile crawled on her face as they stroked the jelly. It seemed that she approved of the slime in her arms. "Areem, what is going on? Who is this?" Brock asked, faced with the beautiful, scaled newcomer to their group. "This is Senior White, the local deity. She offered to help us find the other." Seth explained the situation, skipping the less important stuff. I see, that's great. It is. Okay, I'm ready. Give me some room." Senior White finally said, after cuddling the slime for a moment. The group took some distance and watched. Senior White closed her eyes and pressed her palms against each other. The next moment a light shockwave rippled through the mist. The contours of Mistopheles became visible for a split second, right beside Seth. Fortunately, the recorders were aimed at the local deity, performing her ritual. When her eyes opened again, she squinted at the place where the demon had been seen for a moment but did not act any further on it. There are several fights going on in the city. Aside from the former residents, there are at least 16 people currently fighting in the city. Seth was relieved for only a moment. 16? They were missing 7 people, how were there 16 fights? Chapter 442. Wyvern? Seth was slightly stumped by Senior White's revelation. Even if everyone missing was having a cliché one-on-one fight, that was at most 14. Who else was there? Another enemy or maybe passers-by? I see you are confused. Let's go to the one closest and deal with things as they come. Senior White suggested. She was right. Who was fighting was not important right now. They had to hurry. Everyone agreed, leading to the weird scene of a scaled lady, a bunch of people, and an ever-growing entourage of hopping slimes running through the dim city streets. The motley crew followed the deity through the misty streets. The snake's face paled when she noticed the damage that her mist inadvertently caused. Despite the smile she would show when she faced the group, Seth saw the signs of sorrow when he looked away from them. Surprisingly, the blacksmith could understand the emotions the snake was probably going through. Seeing familiar streets and places, the town you called your home, fall apart and change. At the time he did not have the chance to mourn since his life was on the line, but when he thought back to Alpha, he could imagine how she felt. However, he didn't know how to comfort her. It also was not the time to comfort her. He did not really worry about the hero, the saintess, or the mysterious girl. Seth feared for the ice witch and the fiery swordsman. It seems the fight ahead has concluded, the snake informed them. After a while, they finally came across a blood-covered Hubert leaning on a collapsed wall. At first glance, the demonic merchant looked miserable, but he seemed to have already healed up. Only his clothes were a mess. The person opposite him did not look much better. Her beige uniform was also ripped and burned, it barely covered her important regions. The place bore witness to a fierce battle with collapsed houses, craters, and destroyed cobblestone. It was like a sight from a war zone. Sitting on a pile of rubble, she fixated on Hubert vigilantly. Her gaze only shifted when the group of newcomers entered the scene. At first hopeful, it turned depressed when she saw that it was not her comrades that arrived to help. The blacksmith needed a moment to realize that she was probably from another team. He didn't remember her from the ceremony in Krna. It was her clothes that did not fit the setting of this world that made him realize. You have to catch her. She attacked me right after I fell into this city. Hubert hurriedly called out. Hey! We had a truce, she shouted incensed. Seth ignored the two and checked the surroundings first. He breathed a sigh of relief to find none of the undead he had faced involved in this battle. Other participants were no problem. Even if team members lost to them, they would only be transported back to Krna. A cold shower still ran down his spine when he thought of the weapons his two attackers wielded. The daggers they used had a dark aura, that disgusted Seth like the smell of shit and the taste of bile. Soul-pinning dagger. Epic. Physical attack, 870. Mag attack, 230. 1 soul sealing. 2 forced conversion. This malefic weapon fusing the power of dark magic and evil rituals was created by craftsman Durnham for the sole purpose of empowering his daughter. Requirements: subordinate of Durnham family. This weapon could prevent the Empire's safety measures, but it was not the primary function. Being killed with this would completely seal one's soul in their body and forcefully convert them into a sentient undead in servitude of the Dunham family. His previous attackers were probably victims of the kind of weapons they carried themselves. It was just creepy how they could stay almost the same person, except for the addition of undying loyalty to their master. It was good news that the instigators were not here, but that was separate from the topic at hand. He ignored their previous bickering and acted as if nothing happened. Senior White, how are the other fight going? He asked to make sure. They are pretty balanced for now. Seth nodded and turned back to the two. So? Would anybody care to explain what happened? The man with a snake on his shoulder, a scaled lady at his side, and an army of slimes in the back asked for an explanation. Seeing him not immediately take action to apprehend her, visibly relieved the woman. Her body that was ready to fight or flee at any time relaxed a little. Both tried to speak and interrupted each other at the same time. Hubert, you first. The merchant described how a giant creature made of bones had swallowed his beautiful airship. Seeing no other way out, he activated the self-destruct function, which ejected all passengers before overloading the engine. Managing to equip a personal barrier item just before he lost consciousness, saved his life upon impact in the city. He was recovering when that woman suddenly stumbled out of an alley and attacked him using a bunch of weird artifacts. They fought a brutal fight where they pitted their various items against each other until they finally got to the point of mutual destruction and decided to have a truce instead of dying. After the merchant ended his epic narrative where he displayed himself as an impeccable and powerful hero of justice, Seth turned to the woman to listen to her. I only attacked because I thought he was part of the people who attacked us. I'm just an archaeologist, I wouldn't stand a chance against a combat class. She explained unwillingly. Her name was Megan. She and her group had arrived in this land a few days earlier, through a method she did not wish to further talk about. Following the guidance of one of her comrades leading them north, they faced the sudden assault of the undead. The party managed to escape, but a group of especially strong undead kept chasing them. In the end, they managed to separate the group when they entered the thick mist to lose their pursuers. When she found herself alone in the fog-covered desolate city, she found Hubert just standing on the street. The chance that he was just a passerby didn't come to her mind. Even if he was part of an enemy team, she decided to attack. Seth nodded to himself in thought, when she finally ended her story. Her information helped him confirm some of his suspicions. There were definitely people after them. People that got their information from outside and knew them and their position at all times. In that regard, he could only suspect that something was going wrong on the broadcasting side. In light of this insight, he did not care about the little skirmish between the merchant and archaeologist. These people were after all of them, and it was better if all participants worked together in that case. Okay, you two. We don't have time for this. There are bigger things going on than the evaluation. Now shake hands and make up. We have to keep going, he said, using the voice of Seth to make his words more convincing. Yes, be nice to each other and follow along. Tatzel imitated the patronizing tone. Although both were stunned, they did as told and joined the motley crew in their hurry to the next fight. We have to hurry, the fight ahead has taken a turn. They reached a wide square with marks of weapon skills all over the place. Oh no! Ergash! The archaeologist sighed when she saw a huge figure standing in the middle of the square. A crushed figure was laying on the ground, while another opponent standing in front of the giant orc. He was still standing, holding a massive battle axe, despite the long sword that was pierced through his chest. The remaining enemy had already lowered his weapon. The crushed figure on the ground also slowly got back to its feet. Haha, you came too late, they taunted. Slowly the tall orc came back to life and the undead that had laid on the ground went ahead to pull his sword from his ribcage. But when he grabbed for the hilt, he suddenly jumped back to dodge. Seth had no intention to let this thing grab its weapon and started shooting arrows from a distance. The first one managed to dodge, but the arrow slightly changed its trajectory and hit the second undead in the chest. Ugh! What the undead who had taunted them kneeled down, groaning in pain. The white snake suddenly halted and looked into a specific direction, ignoring the situation in front. What is it, Senior White? Seth asked as he knocked his second arrow. Do you know someone with power over a wyvern? She mused. A wyvern? Why did she suddenly mention a? Chapter 443 Undead Escape. Wyvern. The back of a giant wyvern was plowing through the houses towards them, from the direction White was looking. As it came past between the opposing groups, they all saw a giant djinn with purple skin grabbing it by the throat and pushing it across the city. Caleb, the archaeologist called out when the wyvern came into view. Do you know the wyvern? Seth asked, wondering what a weird name that was for a wyvern. Why yes, it's the mount of our leader Caleb. Megan answered quickly. The identity was the wyvern was cleared and Seth had a good idea whose desert ghost was giving the knockoff dragon an ass whooping. Cade. Can you hear me? Call back Casper. Caled, or Caleb, whatever, he's not our enemy. Seth shouted, using his voice skills to amplify his shout. Oof, with a shout of having the pressed out of her lungs, Cade was catapulted after the fighting monsters and landed on the square. She was transformed into a chimera with the features of different animals. It looked imposing, but she was breathing heavily and holding her stomach. Shortly after, a man in a silver suit of armor also landed in the square. He didn't look fresh anymore, either. Parts of the armor were ripped away, with claw marks and dents covering the whole thing. The newcomer was slightly stunned when he spotted Megan among the people already present. Megan, he asked breathlessly. Caleb, stop fighting. These people are not the enemies. The guys over there killed Ergash. She hurriedly stepped forward and pointed across the deep gash the wyvern engine had dug into the square. He looked over, to find three silhouettes standing in the mix of dust and mist. The one with an arrow in his shoulder was already standing again. But isn't that Ergash over there? Caleb asked confusedly. Caleb. It's Megan, she betrayed us, the hunk of meat suddenly said to muddy the waters. It might have been an intelligent move if the orc was not standing beside two menacing-looking strangers that were not very trustworthy, either. They already turned him into an undead. Be careful of their weapons, they can forego the Empire's safety measures. Seth warned him. Kukuku, it won't change anything, even if you know the damaged undead exposed their ruse. Idiot. The other undead sighed. If Caleb had still been doubtful, now he was not anymore. It was only a short exchange, but it was enough to clear the fronts for Cade and Caleb that had just joined them. The djinn and wyvern stopped getting at each other's throat and also faced the three undead. Haha, this will be a glorious fight, the orc zombie cheered. Shut up, there is no way for us to win. Retreat. Before anyone could react, the three vanished through a grotesque gate, into what looked like a dark purple dimension. Caleb cursed. He just saw a dead comrade run off with the enemy. This had to sting, but Seth didn't have time to deal with the leader's hurt feelings. Senior White. The next destination. Let's hurry, the scaled lady nodded and started running in a new direction. What is going on? Cade asked laboriously. She had returned to her usual form, this time without the illusion. I will explain on the go. You come, too, the blacksmith answered and pointed at Caleb to follow along. Following the deity to the next fight, Seth quickly explained his conjectures about their current enemy and the weapons they used. You are telling me someone is using the broadcasting tech to get rid of the participants? Why? Caleb asked between drinking potions to recover. To increase their strength maybe. All I know is that it's the only thing that would explain what is happening right now. Elsa and Marcel were surrounded. 3 people in black robes were constantly attacking the two. They were together, but they didn't survive the fall without injuries. Before they could recover by much, these weirds suddenly appeared with a group of undead and tried to kill them. Marcel didn't know for how long they had been fighting. The zombies were no big hurdle and the fight had soon turned into a 3-on-2. The couple had a hard time keeping up with the 3 attackers. One had exceptional skill in wielding a halberd, another wore like him a sword and shield, the third was a skilled assassin who kept mixing assaults and throwing weapons. To make it worse, their teamwork was overwhelming. Keeping the shield warrior at bay was already hard for Marcel. Without Elsa he would have long fallen to the halberd or the assassin that kept using the opening in his defense to attack his back or the mage. Fortunately, the ice mage was not restricted to a specific range and excelled in both close, middle, and long-range spells she could use for attack and defense. Although the two were barely able to keep up, the fatigue was catching up with them. While their opponents had unlimited stamina, the lovers were already breathing heavily. It was but a matter of time until their attention slipped. Marcel could feel the weight of his shield, his weapon, and his armor as if he was carrying a mountain on his shoulder and anvils tied to his hands. Energy left his body at an abnormally fast rate, but there was nothing he could do about it. Over his own, heavy breaths, he could only hear the mellow breaths of Elsa, who also had a hard time holding on. It was the only thing that steeled Marcel's grip on his weapons and made him stand upright despite the weight on his shoulder. The moment he fell, she would also die. The attack of the halberd shook him out of his thoughts. He was barely fast enough to lift his shield. His arm numbed on the impact. The next moment the other warrior's sword approached. Again, Marcel managed to block it with his own at the last moment. With a fire blast, he blew both of them back and a rain of icicles forced the shield warrior to block while halberd evaded. Suddenly, Marcel turned around and slashed at Elsa, or rather the air above her. With a clank, his sword was blocked by a short sword and the assassin was interrupted. A thorn of ice shot up from the ground and tried to impale the assassin, but the small ninja blocked this, too, and landed some distance away. He threw a fan of knives, which Marcel blocked using his shield. From the corner of his eyes, he saw Elsa erect an ice shield behind them and concentrated on the front. However, just as he was about to block the halberd wielder's attack, he heard the shattering of glass behind him. A blunt impact hit his back and pushed all the air out of his lungs. He was thrown forward, landing hard on the devastated cobblestone. He desperately tried to fill his lungs, erratically grasping for his sword and shield. Trying to get up and back to Elsa's side. In his blurry vision, he only saw the giant figure of the halberd wielder charging at the defenseless mage. His mana was emptied out, his body unable to grab his sword. No! Marcel's despairing scream echoed through the streets. Elsa's heart was pierced. Hurry! Senior White urged. She became faster and only Seth, Ellie, and Caleb were able to keep up. He turned around the corner, just in time to see a warrior break through an ice barrier with his shield bash and strike Marcel square in the back. In the opposite direction of the swordman's trajectory, was a huge man charging with a halberd at Elsa. Elsa's heart was pierced. Her body slowly dissipated into white particles. The ice witches and the undead's bodies were skewered by a slim stone needle that had suddenly erupted from the ground below. The scaled lady, Ellie, Caleb, and even Tatzel were looking at him in shock when Seth lowered his giant's rod. It was the only possibility he was able to come up with. Instinctively he had taken out his rod and pierced the icy maiden. With a mighty earth spear. Taking out her and the halberd user at the same time. Not only the people at his side were looking shocked. Marcel, the assassin, and the shield bearer had also stopped moving and stared at the intruders. What are you looking at? Seth asked, pissed, and wielded his girthy rod. Before he could recover from his shock, the assassin also turned into a shish kebab. Pierced through the back door and out of the throat, the undead did not die but was immobilized. He could not even scream. The shield bearer quickly retreated in a similar fashion to the 3 earlier. Quick, kill that thing before he manages to get free. Seth interrupted his comrades, who were looking at the skewered assassin with empathy. Caleb charged at the pinned undead and destroyed its skull with a thrust of his lance, granting it eternal rest. Chapter 444. Triple Hero. Seth. How could you do that to Elsa? The flaming swordsman screamed. Mobilizing his last energy, Marcel charged at Seth with tears flowing down his cheeks. Before Marcel could grab onto the blacksmith, Seth had already caught his collar. Calm down. She isn't dead. Listen. She isn't dead, he kept shaking the heartbroken man a few times. If that halberd had pierced her, we would be facing an undead Elsa now. I saved her, he said for Marcel as much as for himself. Although the Empire told them they would return in this kind of event, he depended on calm reaction to deal with the situation. However, they didn't have time to dwell on it, so Seth quickly explained the most important parts about the weapons the undead were carrying. While explaining, he shoved a potion into Marcel's gob, so he had to shut up and listen. Looking around, he found the other staring at him, waiting for something. After hearing about the fights, Seth had just been hurrying to get things done before everything got worse. He had no idea at what point he had become the leader of this ragtag group. Even Caleb, who he didn't know, waited for him to make a decision. He took a deep breath and thought about what to do from here on seriously. We are still missing a priest, an idiot hero, and a normal idiot. How many of your group are still missing? He asked Caleb. Their current group had grown quite a bit, and everyone had mostly recovered thanks to potions. Counting out Urgash, there should still be 7 of my people in the vicinity, the Wyvern Rider answered worriedly. I see. I believe we are enough to split up. You cowl the moment he thought of Caleb's wyvern, Seth facepalmed himself. Yeah, how good, and much faster to boot, would it be if they flew over the city instead of running on the street? They could have flown the whole time. Look, who finally remembered the great me? Puffles commented snarkily. In the heat of the moment, he forgot about the big mean nightmare centipede. He had gotten a little too used to holding back. The Ivisor also had not bothered to remind him. I'm sorry, Puff. Please, we need your help. Fine. Seth's group didn't react much, but Caleb, Megan, and even Senior White jumped back when a giant centipede, tens of meters long, appeared above the group. A divine being, White muttered. You have eyes, little snake. I congratulate you on your ability to recognize my greatness. The Ivisor bragged proudly. We will split up. Caleb, you take Marcel and Ellie with you on your wyvern. I will take the others. We can help at more places this way. Seth suggested. After recovering from the shock, everyone got ready. The white snake was a little hesitant to board the giant centipede but did not hold them back. Senior White would come with Seth, while Caleb would follow her direction in a different direction. He also had Ellie for quick scouting on the ground. With this constellation, they split up to cover more ground. Seth on the other hand sat together with the rest on Puffle's long back, and they flew to the next scene, following the divine guidance. Harker was having a hard time. It was the first time in a long while that he struggled against an opponent. Even if they were many levels higher and more numerous than him, he had always prevailed thanks to his power as a hero. Join our mistress. A strong one like you will be treated even better than us, one of them said with a laugh. These enemies were his worst nightmare. Despite his incredible skills and status, he had no edge over them. Because they were also heroes. Harker even vaguely remembered their faces from the starting ceremony in Krina. Had the other team made an alliance to take out their concurrents, or was someone controlling them? Maybe this mistress. He didn't have the time to think. With the slave Mancer behind him and empowered by his buffs, he was barely capable to maintain a war of attrition against the two for now. We won't treat the caster behind you bad, either, the other said as the two kept moving around the hero with perfect teamwork. They had to persevere until they got reinforcements, if there even was someone that could help them. Harker's hope started waning. As time went by, cuts and bruises kept accumulating because he could not completely keep up with the two. He was getting closer to the edge. He would not be able to hold out much longer. In his moments of desperation, a lance of light fell from the misty skies. It did not hit its target, but it made the hero to the left of Harker lose the rhythm, giving him the chance to land a strike against the second enemy. Ugh! Harker's energy blade split the undead's armor, but the cut below was only shallow. Stumbling back, the cut opponent was hit by another light lance, being stunned by holy damage. This gave Ben the chance to counter the hero who had evaded a similar lance earlier and tried to strike at Rich. With a roar, a wyvern became visible in the fog above their head and spit a row of wind blades at the stunned enemy. Tisk, the one Harker had counter-scoffed and freed himself from the entanglement to save his comrade. This isn't over, he promised. Carrying his partner, he jumped into a purple gate rimmed by black bones that had suddenly opened behind him. At this point, Harker was just glad that the fight ended. Seeing Ellie and Marcel with the stranger on the wyvern calmed him down. With a wave of relief, the exhausted hero finally fainted. "Krana! Elsa!" Lena exclaimed as she rushed into the room. "Thank God you are okay." "Princess Lena? What happened? Don't tell me." "I died," the ice mage asked confused. The princess took a deep breath to calm down. She had expected the worst when the team of Earth suddenly vanished from the radar along with most other teams on Kavati Kuinan. "Yes, you did. You were lucky," she answered her as calmly as possible, grasping Elsa's shoulders. After she and Hardwig talked with the single survivor of the team from a birth, their suspicions had been mostly confirmed. The teams were being targeted. Unfortunately, they were too slow. They had just started to root out the traitors when teams all over Kavati Kuinan started disappearing. At the moment there were only 3 left and 2 had suddenly disappeared at the same time. With a calm voice, she started to brief Elsa about the situation. The mage already knew that someone was aiming for their lives, but not about the gravity behind this. "Had that halberd hit me, I could have actually died." She mumbled and touched the place on her chest where she had been pierced. She had a complicated expression, thinking back to the events. "Yes, this is what gives me hope. Somebody must have realized what was going on and killed you first." Lena confirmed seriously. "Who are those people? Why are they trying to kill us?" Fear could be seen on the cold beauty's face. It was the first time the princess saw this much emotion on her face. "We suspect that they were sent by the Spacia Empire. They are the only ones with a motive and the means to intercept our technology like this." "But what is their motive?" Elsa asked. "The only guess we have is to prove a point." Lena answered ponderingly. "What?" the Ice Witch exclaimed. "I would have to go back a little to explain it. In the beginning, our 2 empires were one. Though we often deny it. Officially, the sons of the emperor of that time ultimately split the empire because of a difference in religious views. I doubt it was that simple, but is the official reason. Both empires followed the system god. The difference lies in our way of expansion. The Krana Empire quite frankly wants to take the role of a savior. We start colonies in new worlds and try to help and grow along with the citizen without intervening too much in their original society. All of it follows the doctrine to preserve the player's free will and strive for mutual benefit. Spacia on the other hand are conquerors. They will abolish the native hierarchy and society and forcefully implements their own class system. It's strict and goal-driven. The people will be classified on their classes and aptitudes. Everything is designed to make people seek power. Those with useful classes will gain benefits, while the others, well. The princess paused for a moment. "But what has that to do with proving a point?" Elsa asked impatiently. Lena sighed. "Since you guys can fight back, our guess is that they sent their talents to kill our promising talents to prove that their way of serving the system god is correct. If we are right, it might just be a precursor." Chapter 445. Bagged as proviant. A loud whoosh in the mist above paused the fight, giving her once again the chance to escape. Fiannis had been playing the cat and mouse game with her attackers for a while. She had fought them several times and managed to escape using the ramshackle houses and mist. Although she was better at fighting than a traditional thief, thanks to her unique class Mountain Brigand, she couldn't persevere fighting 2 opponents at the same time. Ultimately, it was still a class reliant on stealth, traps, and ambushes. Slowly, she reached the end of her rope. The materials to set traps were running low and she didn't have any time to drink potions during the constant pursuit. She had already been lucky just now, the next confrontation might be her last. Parkouring through the ruins of the city, she did her best to avoid any rubble that could make noise. As a mountain brigand, she could move like a ghost in the wilderness, but the cityscape made it hard for her to lose her pursuers. When Fiannis couldn't hear anyone behind her, she used the chance and dropped through an open trapdoor into the small cellar of a building. She hid between the shelves with sacks and jars, maybe it was once the storage of a shop? Crouching down, she forcefully calmed her ragged breathing. The cuts and bruised from the fight burned in the cold and moist air. She smiled in derision. Who would have thought that she, who had dominated the great mountains, would end up in such a state, even running from a fight? Using the little break, she drank a potion and applied an ointment to her wound to quicken the healing. The brigand was occupied smearing the green ointment on the worst cuts when she heard the floor above her head creak. Someone had entered the building. She could hear the light steps. "I know you are here," a cold voice stated, quite certain. "It is futile to run. You should have realized that your stealth can't keep up with our detection skills. Just surrender. It will make life a lot easier for all of us," he lamented. Yes, she knew. Fiannis had exhausted all her experience and stealth skills to the max, but they were still able to follow her. From her hiding spot in the dark corner of the cellar, she could see the male figure of one of her pursuers drop down through the trapdoor. The dim light from above gave him a menacing silhouette. Another creaking. A second person had entered the house. The wooden floorboards groaned a lot louder than the first time. "Ornston, is she here?" the second pursuers asked from above in a booming voice. "Yeah. Stay up there, Smoke, in case our slippery target gets past me." Before Ornston could step deeper into the cellar, the floorboard sighed again. "Just lightly." Who are you guys?" "Ornston, we have Ugh. Wow. Ack." Ornston still deliberated to look for her or help as the fight broke out above their heads. Quick steps, the heavy thumping of meat being hit, the tip of a massive sword pierced through the floorboards, followed by the rumble of someone falling. The undead stared at the ceiling in shock, as a bloody claw pierced the floorboards from above with a squelching sound. From her corner, she saw the undead curse and turn back, but then he started acting weirdly. "Do you think you can beat me because you got rid of the muscle head?" He spoke to the thin air and pulled out his terrifying lance. He started wildly stabbing at thin air as if fighting several opponents. He fought the air valiantly, but the moment he stepped into the dim light below the open trapdoor, a blood-dripping claw shot down from above and grabbed his head. 5 sharp claws easily pierced his skull. With a scream of terror, he vanished upwards through the opening. With a disgusting crunch, his scream was instantly cut off. The proud mountain brigand pushed herself even deeper into the small corner, pilling moldy rags and bags over her head. She already stood no chance against those 2 bastards. What kind of hellish monster had wiped them out so easily? Fiannis waited, surrounded by the smell of earth and mold, but nothing happened. When everything stayed quiet for a while and her wound had healed, she decided to carefully take a look at the situation. She climbed up, back into the house. No signs of their bodies, she only found the 2 pools of rotten blood on the floor. "Yo!" she suddenly heard behind her, after she snuck out on the street. Fiannis jumped in fright but instinctively brought out her weapons to defend. "Calm down, I'm with Caleb." "You look like a bandit, are you?" Fiannis. Speaking to her was a cute girl, lifting her hands to the air as a signal that she came in peace. Although she wasn't sure yet, that she knew her name and that of their leader, and most of all, that she was not an undead charging at her, gave her hope. It's Fiannis," she answered hesitantly. "If you are really with Caleb and the others, then we have to get away. My attackers were spirited away by a terrifying beast. It might still be in the vicinity," she warned. Cade could only awkwardly scratch her cheek as the rough-looking bandit girl described what just happened. The terrible monster she was talking about was her. As Rakshasa, she didn't mind the flesh of the undead. She had bagged the 2 as proviant, after defeating them. "Ah, yes. I'm Cade," she introduced herself. "Follow me, we have to intervene in another fight, before we meet up with the others." "What are you talking about?" the exhausted bandit asked tiredly. "Come, let's talk on the way." Still hesitant, Fiannis joined Cade on their way through the city. On the way, the Rakshasa girl tried to explain what was going on, despite not 100% knowing everything herself. Soon, they heard the noise of battle muffled by thick fog. "This way, come on." Cade spurred. Fiannis sped up, too. She had become more compliant after listening to the rough context of what was going on. Although she did not seem to have treated the evaluation as a game, realizing that she could have suffered a fate worse than death incensed her. It was quite funny to Cade, to see the woman that had just been shivering and crying while hiding in a pile of waste, was incensed enough to get the irrational notion of taking revenge. However, she couldn't say that she disliked this kind of a tomboy. "How dare you step before me, with such a weak will," the deep voice of a giant hollered from ahead. They came just in time to see a figure get flung away and crash into a house, turning it into a complete ruin. The scene that was revealed to them from the fog made them stop in their tracks. "You ain't getting away after breaking my precious poleaxe." Grasping them on their ankle, a dwarven warrior was pulling back a battered person as it desperately tried to crawl away. He continued to lift the attacker with force and slam them back on the ground. He was about to dismember the undead with a massive falchion when he noticed the 2 women approach. "Peepolter," the woman beside her mumbled, seeing the bloody dwarf. Oh! If it isn't Fianus! You are finally joining the party? Finish off the poor sob stuck in the wall over there, if you don't mind. He gestured at the house-turned-rubble, where the legs of his other victim were sticking out from. Don't bother, I will do it myself, he said, when he saw the two ladies not moving, even after he beheaded his undead. He proceeded to pull out the person from the rubble and end its undead existence. He wiped the falchion before sheathing it again and put the massive tower shield, as big as himself, on his back before approaching the two. Did you see enough, ladies? He asked. Is everything according to plan? Came a wizened voice from the communication orb. Despite the static because of the great distance, she was able to understand what it said. Yes, grandfather. I had some small complications with the team, but now they are all on my side. When Spacia finally notices that things deviated, it will already be too late, she assured the old man. Although everything had been her idea, because of the class she had gotten just before the evaluation, as the patriarch of the family, her grandfather had made the decisions and helped smoothen things along the way. And the bones. It is harder than I expected, but I will be done soon. Good. Don't forget, Nadina, our rise will start with you. Everything for the family, she said. Everything for the family. It came back from the orb, and it finally dimmed. She gripped the orb tightly. Yes, she would lead her family into a bright future. Chapter 446. Fallen Silent. After dropping Cade like a tactical warhead, the Puffles bomber continued in a different direction. Their path was a little farther. That's weird. The fight ahead suddenly fell silent. The scaled lady mumbled behind Seth. You mean it's already over? The monk in the back asked, worried. No. It simply fell silent. Senior White answered uncertainly. When they reached the scene of the fight, a field of statues appeared from the fog. Upon closer inspection, they were not statues. The horde of zombies below was unmoving as if it was caught in a state of stasis. Don't fly any lower. I can feel the traces of a divine domain. You might get caught in it. I know. I can feel it too. Puffles answered sulkily. The divine chylopod stayed roughly 10 meters above the ruins of the city. They followed the trail of petrified undead on the streets until they could soon hear chanting from below. Kneeling on the ground, surrounded by 3 high-ranking undead was Yvette. The Saintess was frantically chanting. She is currently sustaining a sanctuary. However, she seems exhausted. Senior White commented. What do we do? We can't go down, right? Brock asked. Isn't it obvious what we do? Seth asked, confused. He had already equipped the Mind Reaper. A bunch of unmoving targets. I will just shoot them from here. Do you have no honor as a warrior? Senior White asked, intrigued. I'm a blacksmith. I don't give 2 cents on a warrior's honor. In the meantime, he had already nogged an arrow and shot without aiming, using the Life Reaper skill. Without even looking, the arrow easily found its way and lodged itself into the head of one of the 3 high-ranked undead. See, our dear comrade is holding them down for us, so we can end them. He shot another one. It wouldn't be nice to let her wait. 4 more arrows, one by one, found their way into the vitals of the stuck attacker. Even with such fatal attacks hitting them, they did not move. It was like shooting mannequins. It felt just a little unfair. Nothing that would keep Seth awake at night. Ding! You have leveled up. You are now level 63. The bard heard the notification, surprised. The experience had been coming in so scarcely, that he had already given up on gaining another level anytime soon. But he had to deal with the situation before he could give it a look. The Saintess was still frantically chanting. It seemed that she did not notice the arrival of reinforcements. She only stopped when a roll of rope suddenly hit her head and broke her concentration. Grab on! We will get you out of here. With her concentration also broke the spell. The sanctuary unraveled, and while the ordinary zombie horde started moving again, the 3 attackers crumpled to the ground. Still confused, she followed the blacksmith's order and almost instinctively grabbed onto the rope. The Evisor did not need any further hints and rose to the sky, lifting Yvette into safety. Brock and Hubert started pulling up the rope, while the exhausted woman desperately clung to it. I'm glad you guys are okay, she gasped as Brock helped her onto the back of the centipede. Okay, let's get to the next fight. And Seth started talking, but Senior White shook her head. The other fights have ended. The city has fallen silent, she explained. Seth nodded, while the others on Puffle's back looked a little gloomy. Especially the archaeologist Megan. She was the only one of their party currently present and she only knew about Caleb other than her. She didn't want it to be true, but Senior White had no reason to lie. What about Caleb? She asked hopefully. The one riding a dragon and the one who fought him seem fine, the snake answered, lifting a weight off the archaeologist's heart. I see. Senior White, could you help us one last time to collect those who are left and regroup? The blacksmith asked the deity solemnly. The scaled lady nodded, and they followed her directions to find Cade. They found her sitting together with a dwarf and a tanned woman. The latter gave a valiant impression and with the light armor made of beast leather and fur. Seth was an enjoyer of pretty ladies in all variations, but it was the dwarf that really caught his attention. Or rather, what the bearded fellow wore. The clean lines of his unadorned full-plate armor gave him the aura of an unstoppable tank. He vigilantly eyes the giant nightmare in the sky. In his right hand, he held a long and vicious falchion. Probably his secondary weapon. In his left was a mighty shield that made him look even more like an impenetrable fortress. What really surprised him, was that he could not appraise the armor. It was not because his skill was too low, but it was actually blocked. Similarly, to how there were scrolls that could appraise an item permanently, there were those that could inhibit appraisal. It didn't matter much. The blacksmith had already learned not to depend on the system skills for everything. Judging by the dark grey sheen of the armor, he was tempted to think it could be adamantium. The armor didn't give off any elemental auras, which meant that the enchantments were self-contained, without reliance on specific elements. Seth guessed that the dwarf and his armor were similar to Tekker and the armor Seth had made for him. He really wanted to have a closer look, but he couldn't let it slip right now. If the enemy tapped into the broadcasting, they would know everything that got recorded. Fenny. Poulter, the archaeologist called out once she saw the two. The moment Puffles was low enough, she jumped off and ran towards them. The valiant woman caught her in an embrace. Since when was our little archaeologist so emotional? She teased Megan, grinning. Meow, the girl made a sound in disagreement but hugged the bandit woman back. Seeing their party member jump off the monster, the dwarf finally put away his weapon, but not in his inventory. He wore the falchion on his belt and the shield on his back. It's good to see that we aren't the only ones, girl, the dwarf Poulter said gruffly. An attentive listener would be able to hear a tiny smile somewhere in that majestic beard. The eye visor landed and everyone got off to stretch their legs. Seth went ahead to greet Cade. It's good to see that everything somehow worked out on your end. It seems it didn't go as well on your end, she asked, seeing only Yvette as a new addition on Seth's side. We had just rescued Yvette, when Senior White told us that the fights in the city had stopped. We came to collect you. Cade nodded and joined the rest of the group, while Seth approached the three who were having a small reunion. And who are you, bub? The dwarf stepped forward, blocking his way. A glint flashed through Seth's eyes when he saw the ring on the dwarf's thick finger. Hello, I'm Seth, he said and offered his hand to shake. The blacksmith knew some dwarven greetings from aura, however, he judged them useless in this situation. Except for their inherent nature and preferences, the cultures of races could crassly differentiate based on the world they developed in. Poulter actually took his hand, only to proceed with pulling Seth very close to him and whispering in his ears. The bard had not expected it, but it was a good chance. I don't know you and I don't trust you. I don't know what you plan, but know this: Is this Ithilden? Seth interrupted him. With strength the dwarf had not expected, Seth had twisted his hand and was staring at the ring. The dwarf tried to pull back but noticed that his hand was caught in an iron grip. Is it Ithilden? Seth asked again. The dwarf's bushy eyebrows lifted when he saw the glow in the other's eyes. Are you a blacksmith? He asked suspiciously. It was Seth's turn to get even closer to the dwarf and whisper in his ear. He didn't directly answer the question. Instead, he made an offer. I know that little knife is not your main weapon. It's way too short to be used by a dwarf in addition to a shield. Tell me about the Ithilden and I will lend you a weapon that fits you better. The offer was already more than enough for the dwarf to realize the answer to his question. The dwarf nodded decisively. We will talk more later, Seth whispered, and the two separated again. I'm Poulter Onyx Heart, nice to meet you. The dwarf's previous hostility had completely vanished. No matter what cultural differences developed depending on the world, blacksmiths always had a high standing among dwarfs. Poulter's change in attitude was the best example. What were you two talking so intimately about? The woman called Fenny smoothly entered the conversation. She got close to Seth and let her hands intimately wander over his shoulders. I'm Fianus, the great mountain queen. Why don't you talk a little more with me? Or has the mighty hero who saved our little Megan a thing for short old men? She asked. Her well-tanned face was so close that he could feel her soft breath on his face. Who would shove away a beautiful woman that was offering herself? He aggressively grabbed her hips and pulled her close to him. She blushed but didn't resist. He leaned forward and she closed her eyes. However, he didn't go in for the kiss. I have a girlfriend, but she is quite open. When we are back in Krina, I'm sure she lets you join us if you ask her nicely, he whispered to her ears with a wolfish grin. Then he simply let her go while laughing. Such an aggressive woman, it was better to give her a little shock. Scoundrel, she exclaimed, blushing furiously. You fled. She was looking at the row of undead kneeling before her. Explain. Some were stronger than expected and they managed to regroup quickly thanks to external help. I am sorry, mistress. She sighed. It was a fact that they lost some of their combat ability after just turning undead. 2 teams at once might have been too much to ask. Fine, it doesn't matter if we didn't get all of them. I will just proceed with the plan a little ahead of time. We are done here anyway. She smiled, even if she lost a few, she still earned a lot, no matter what happened. Chapter 447. Those we control. Okay, let's all get on Puffles, we still have to meet up with Caleb. Puffles did not fly this time. It was to save his mana. Instead, he rushed through the streets of the crumbling city like a runaway train. Megan helped the Mountain Queen calm down, while the Ivisor Express rushed to their next destination. Once the group was completed, they had to talk about how they would proceed from here on. It was clear that someone was aiming for their lives, and they probably had hijacked Krina's broadcasting. The problem was that they could not contact Krina from their place. Originally, Krina would open a spatial gate for the participants, once the participants finished the quest based on the coordinates of the recorders. The fact that they had not done this yet to evacuate them, could only mean that they either couldn't or didn't want to. Neither of the options boded well for them. Mom, are you worried? Maybe Big Mom could tetzel him innocently. What are you saying? With me around, there is no need for anyone else. Me, Puffles, the Great is more than enough to deal with some stupid undead. It's not just the undead. But thank you too for trying to cheer me up. I'm okay. He answered them with a smile. It took a while, but finally, the silhouettes of a resting wyvern appeared from the fog. The Ivisor Express had just entered a wide clearing filled with rubble and ruins. It must have been a big fight. Beside the wyvern stood 7 people. There were 4 new additions besides Ellie, Marcel, and Caleb. On wore a deep blue robe with mystic golden embellishments. The hood was pulled deep in his face so that only the lower half could be seen and the rim of a blindfold. The other was even shorter than the dwarf and wore a wild-looking outfit with all kinds of bones, dried plants, and other knickknacks covering his body. His arms were crossed, and he seemed anything but happy. Maybe because he was covered in grey mucus from head to toe. The other 2 were Rich and Harker. The 2 groups came together and greeted each other, finally uniting everyone with their missing party members. Caleb introduced the new faces to Seth. The fortune teller, Tama, smiled mysteriously and bowed his head. Beside him covered in mucus was the goblin Twinkle Rainborn, a high shaman. Seth belatedly realized that it was a female. What happened to you, Twinkle? Megan asked. She was about to hug the small figure but stopped herself just in time. I was swallowed by a slime. She said with reproach and gave Ellie the stink eye. Her long green ears were wiggling in agitation. Hey! If Jim Bob had not swallowed you and used his steel guard in time, you would already be fighting for the enemy. Ellie defended her baby incensed. Humph, the female goblin looked away, pouting. Although they had the directions from Senior White, Caleb's group had used Ellie's slimes to scout in advance since the battlefield could quickly change. They had found the hero first, though the slimes could only watch the fight among 3 heroes from a distance until the Wyvern Rider appeared. The fortune teller was second. He had used his skills to escape the enemy's pursuit and revealed himself willingly to the slimes and was the first they found. By the time they collected him, the slimes had already found Twinkle in a similar situation to Yvette or Seth. The goblin shaman was surrounded by a horde of zombies while 2 attackers sieged her. Had Jim Bob, the steel slime, not jumped forward to protect her, she would have died before the wyvern was able to reach her. Although she very much disliked the fact that she was unable to wash up until now, she could not deny that it saved her life. All of them decided to camp in this place for now and fully recover. In the meantime, they sat together and got acquainted with each other. Maybe everyone should officially introduce themselves and what they can do. Caleb suggested a round of introduction. Before we talk any further, maybe we should get rid of the recorders that we can't control. Seth proposed after explaining that they were probably being tracked by the enemy through them. Those we can't control? Harker asked, a little confused. Ellie watched knowingly, as a bunch of recorders from their group landed on the ground behind Seth and turned off. It didn't take more than that to make the group understand. People immediately started smashing the recorders over their shoulders. Now that they were unobserved, the first question Seth had to answer was obvious. How did you hijack the Empire's recorders? Caleb asked, but everyone looked at him questioningly. He used the chance to introduce himself first. I'm Seth Smith, from Earth. I'm a blacksmith and bard. I have a special skill that allowed me to make these recorders into mine, he explained without revealing how exactly things worked. Ellie already knew and Kate had her guesses after what happened with the champion of Zarkan's soul. After a little back and forth, with the help of the two, they continued with the introduction. The only surprise was Caleb, who was actually a dragon rider, not a wyvern knight. He just lacked a dragon, for obvious reasons. Since we now roughly know each other's capabilities, does anyone have an idea what to do from here on? Harker asked in the round. They gathered what they knew. The attackers were former examination participants, their strength was unquestionable. They could turn them into allies with their weapons. The enemy most likely knew everything they had shown so far. They could not expect any help from Krina. Most importantly, if they ran away, they would probably be stuck in this world until the Empire came. If they didn't want to be stuck here, they needed to finish their quest, which probably meant they had to fight whoever was behind the attacks. If Seth was right, it was the daughter of Durnham. As for the why? They could only speculate. They came to the conclusion that fighting was the best option. Seth was not opposed to this. After all, at the end of this quest stood a dragon's hoard and bones. But what exactly should we do? They know a lot more about us than we do about them, the hero summarized their problem while scratching his head. They only know what we showed them. If we can surprise them with things they don't know, we might catch them off guard. Seth gestured. Another surprise waited for everyone. A mist demon suddenly materialized beside. We should talk about this with everyone. The appearance of the believed to be dead Mistopheles shocked the team members of Earth, while the others were only surprised by the sudden materialization of another ally. You were alive this whole time? Harker asked between anger and joy. Don't blame him, I told him to stay off the grid, just in case. Seth appeased the hero. Why? You couldn't know such a situation would arise. I had a hunch and I learned to follow them. I also have a corresponding ability. Seth simply answered. HOH? I am kind of a fortune teller myself. Would share with me the name of that ability? Thomas, the fortune teller asked. It's called compulsive precognition. HOH? I never heard of that, but it sounds very interesting. Enough, Thomas. Let's talk about a plan. Caleb scolded him. The scaled lady stopped at the edge of the fog bank. This is where our paths part. Senior White revealed to them. Are you really staying, Senior? Tatzel asked sorrowfully. Yes, it is not my time to leave, yet. Are you sure? We could really use your help in what is to come. Seth weakly tried to convince her. He already understood that the deity could not leave this place behind so easily. I am sure. I wish you the best of luck. What you are trying to do is equivalent to tickling a dragon and you will need all the fortune you can get, she warned them. Quite literally. Seth laughed. Ding. You have been blessed by the local deity, the white snake of the mountain. Your luck has increased by 20 for the next 10 days. Seeing the message, everyone thanked Senior White profusely before unwillingly parting with her. Krina. The princess, Elsa, Finn, and Mina were meeting in a private booth of a cafe. Any news? Mina asked Lena, but the princess could only shake her head. Almost 4 days ago, they had completely lost their connection with the recorders on Kavati Koinen. Ever since they had reruns running to hide the fact that they had no idea what was going on. Mina herself only knew because the princess could not stop Elsa from telling her. In the meantime, the team of royals had managed to catch quite a few traitors that had infiltrated the imperial sensors. However, they couldn't fathom the kind of damage they had done. Their people were currently checking all systems for security leaks. The problem was that they did not get any more signals from their recorders. They were unable to check on the situation of the participants. Lena tried to come up with a way to explain everything to Mina when they heard a great commotion from outside. With loud fanfares, a new program was suddenly started up on the public screens of Krina. After a short and loud intro, came a burst of cackling laughter. Welcome to my, Nadine Adernham's great debut. Chapter 448. Broadcasting again. Krina. Lena cursed silently. Their worries were correct, the spies had left backdoors to hijack the broadcasts. She hurriedly called Hardwig. I know. We are already working on cutting the connections, her brother said, distressed, and immediately hung up on her. If they were already working on it, there was nothing she could do right now, except to watch. Panning out, the shot showed Nadine Adernham surrounded by a company of roughly 60 pale people, standing at the edge of a pale cliff. A dark vapor surrounded all of them, was visible in the sunlight. An obvious sign that they were undead. The attractive girl, wearing an intricate black dress, let out a bell-like laugh of confidence. Their identity shocked the audience of Krina. Especially the royals involved with the evaluation had grim looks on their face, when they saw the gallery of undead. This was completely unlike what they had expected. They recognized all of them as participants of the evaluation. People whose adventures the citizens had watched avidly over the last 2 weeks. Each of them was a brilliant gem of their home world and shone with impeccable and unique skills. I'm sure you recognize them, Krina. I, Nadine Adernham of Spacia, have single-handedly exterminated all of your precious sparks, she bragged and paused for dramatic effect. It couldn't be. Elsa thought in a panic. She couldn't believe that she was the only one who survived. What about Marcel? It was the first time the cold beauty felt this disturbed. Calm down, Elsa. It's a lie. Look at the people behind her. None of them is from Earth. She is shaming the royal family in front of the citizens with her lies. Lena calmed her and Mina. It was true, they couldn't spot a familiar face among the people standing with the girl. Although she had not shown it, even Mina had been a little agitated at the girl's words. Why did she call them sparks? Because they burned out so quickly. Finn asked, a little confused. She knew about Spacia, but she didn't know a lot. It's what they call the talents. Like sparks that can light a fire. People from new worlds with the talent to have a great impact on their world and even others, the princess explained absent-mindedly. Citizens of Krina, this is not all. The reason these valiant heroes were sent here, to their death, was to retrieve a full set of ancient dragon bones. Another revelation caused a commotion among those watching. The voices around made Lena scowl. She was well aware that similar conversations were probably going on everywhere in the empire that showed these broadcasts. Ancient dragon bones. How good are they if it's from an ancient dragon? Everything on a dragon is legendary, isn't it? Yes, you could make a national treasure from any part of its body. Why would they send the rookies on such an important quest? What were the royals thinking? The crowd was swaying between wondering about the material and criticizing the royal family to choose something this important as the goals for the evaluation quest. A distorted cry from the screen made the crowd fall silent. On the screen showing the panorama of Nadina and her row of servants, a giant shadow fell on Nadina and the cliff they were standing on. Witness my power, she said dramatically as a gigantic zombie dragon landed behind her and the row of undead participants. With the recorder trying to show the full scope of the dragon, the people were not even recognizable anymore. In the end, it flew so far back, that the whole cliff and the citadel below could be seen. The dragon was like a mountain looming over everything. Its eyes burning with a viciously purple spirit flame, it seemed to stare directly into the camera, stunning the audience. The picture cut back to Nadina, now standing in the shadow of the dragon. She opened her mouth to speak, but a shadow suddenly appeared beside her from a violet mist. After listening to it, a sardonic smile appeared on her face. It seems that challengers have appeared, that wish to give me a chance for demonstration, she announced. The stream cut to a soul man, standing on the ruins at the bottom of the cliff. With his shining armor and vicious-looking sword, he would have almost appeared valiant. If it wasn't for the black-haired man's expression of shock as he stared up the cliff. Find a way to wipe it off, he says. He mumbled something, but they couldn't exactly hear what. It didn't sound happy at all. Lena and the group with her immediately recognized Ben Harker, the hero from the Erdhand team. What is he doing there? This is simply suicide, the four thought in sync. There was another thing, especially Lena recognized. The hero was not wielding the sword given by the Empire, but the one she had returned to Seth before their departure. That means that thrifty Blacksmith is around and actually opened his coffers, Lena commented. She explained about the sword. Although Finn and Mina didn't like what she called Seth, they couldn't deny it. Did you come to challenge me and take revenge for your comrades? I admire your valor, but you should have. Hey, what are you doing? On screen, the hero didn't wait for her to finish her pretentious monologue and started charging toward the cliff. However, to the onlooker it seemed less like he was charging in to attack in a last brave fight, but that he was running away. It was Nadina's turn to widen her eyes and make a grim expression. The audience had no idea what was going on off-screen, but it seemed that she was not happy. Cut the broadcast, she said sternly, and the screens fell silent. Sir, the pirate signal has vanished, one of the enchanters said with a sigh. They had been in a rush to track and cut down the connection, but the signal stopped on its own. Then hurry and find what backdoor they were using and close it, Hardwig answered stressed. However, he did not get a break. An Imperial censor suddenly came running to him. Sir, some of the signals from our recorders came back online, he reported. After the connection had been blocked previously, all signals had vanished. At that time, they really thought either all participants were dead or had their recorders destroyed. Now 5 signals suddenly reappeared. 3 were the overview recorder golems of Earth. They were showing a field of ruins, but at the edge of the picture, on the horizon, part of the zombie dragon could be seen. The other 2 were broadcasting what was currently going on. His eyebrow popped up when he saw what was being broadcasted. For the first time, since the whole chaos started, a small smile appeared on his face. Broadcast these 2, he said with a smile. In the meantime, get our people ready to open a portal at the location of the 3 stationary ones. I will talk with my father to get an elite team for the extraction. We have to hurry and control the damage. A few minutes after the screens went silent, a new broadcast appeared. This time it lacked the cocky commentary. There were only 2 points of view. One showed the cliff from afar, with the small figures of Nadina and her sparks on the cliff, the giant luxurious citadel, and the hero down below, standing among the ruins at the shore. The dragon standing on the cliff was so big, that only its toes and claws digging into the edge of the cliff could be seen. The other recorder was closer to the cliff, somewhere between the hero and Nadina above. It showed the hero closer with sunken ruins and the ocean as a backdrop. The hero was in a hurry to reach the cliffs, as the whole ocean behind started broiling. The people finally saw what had ruined Nadina's mood. No wonder the hero was in a hurry to get away from the water. Do you think? Lena muttered. Trying to throw one headache at the other? It's definitely Seth's idea. Finn commented gleefully. In her mind, only the blacksmith would try something this crazy. Especially since he could use the hero as the bait. Chapter 449. Seriously, a dragon? He should have just used that helmet and... Stop your dumb backseat comments, Seth. That girl is obviously a champion. If he assassinated her, her goddess might curse him. Hermes scolded. These spirit flames, is she a champion of a god of death like you, uncle? Hephaestus asked the god beside him. Hades had a light smile playing around his lips. It was one of the few times the blacksmith god had seen his stoic uncle smile. Yeah, and I can't wait to rub it in her face if our little blacksmith wins. Kavati Koinen. Seriously, a dragon? Seth uttered when he spotted the giant figure gliding in the sky. They were still far away, but the bard was able to see the ruins of the old capital with clairvoyance from the Eye of Argos. The ragtag team of champions had spent a little more than 5 days flying and riding their mounts. Since nobody was watching them anymore, they had nothing to hide. They could have been quicker, but they had to face this land's abominations once again after leaving the fog behind. They had underestimated their enemy. Nobody expected a zombie dragon. They knew about the dragon bones, and that their enemy was a necromancer. But what kind of broken powers did it need to resurrect something like a dragon? How were they supposed to expect them to bring out a weapon of mass destruction? Even as an undead, that thing was the equivalent of a nuclear warhead. Seeing the dragon in the sky, they could completely throw away most of their previous plans. They could not proceed like this. Let's take a break first. I'm sure I can erect a totem of concealment. Twinkle the goblin shaman suggested. Everyone was exhausted and agreed with the suggestion. They would need to calm their thoughts. I will add an illusion barrier. Kate offered. Misto joined the two ladies in the concealment of their campsite. The three already had some practice in this, as they did something similar during the breaks on their journey. Even if they had gotten rid of the tracking devices, they had to stay vigilant in case the necromancer sends scouts. Also, to evade the abominations that roamed the place. They had not come across a surviving city in this place. To make things worse, many of the abominations or amalgamations in this place had reached the carbonized stage, meaning they at least dropped usable souls, unlike the undead participants. Seth still felt peeved when he thought about this. It was also suspicious, but it was a thought he had long stepped in the background in the face of the dragon ahead. He looked over and watched the hero, Caleb, the dwarf, Marcel, and Brock training with their new weapons to get acquainted with them. Though, it was mostly their method to clear their mind. The dragon was clearly visible, even without skills. All of them were slightly shaken by the sight. Seth, the merchant, the archaeologist, Ellie, the fortune-teller, Rich, and the saintess on the other hand were brooding over the fire. Not all of them had hidden cards like Seth, but it was enough to come up with a plan. Since they didn't know the situation in this place, they had only a rough outline. Nothing they could come up with would be able to face the dragon. Watching the warrior swing around his weapons, reminded Seth of his talk with Poulter, the dwarf. Poulter and Seth had sat down in a moldy tavern to talk. This was before they left the mist. You said you might have a weapon I can use, the dwarf asked almost politely. What about the Ithilden? Seth counter-questioned. Yes, my ring is made of dwarven silver. How is it made? The shining eyes of the blacksmith almost scared the dwarf. I can't tell you because I don't know. My grandfather created the ring. Can I meet your grandfather? He is also in Krina, so it won't be a problem to meet him once we returned, I guess? But you should know that he probably won't easily tell you about it. He is really traditional, you might have to pass his test. Poulter cautioned. I understand. By the way, if your grandfather is a blacksmith and you are an Ori dwarf, it means you come from a world where magic had developed for quite some time, right? He asked. The dwarf nodded. Since you have a way to conceal your items from my appraisal, do you have a way to appraise this? He finally said and showed Poulter a poleaxe. The dwarf eyes had widened when his eyes fell on the full metal polearm the blacksmith brought out. I don't exactly, but I am sure I will be able to manage. Poulter's eyes shone like searchlights. It was true that, even though they did not have a specific appraisal skill, people with high-ranking weapon classes had a knack to find out the powers of a weapon. Seth was sure the dwarf could manage. In addition to his class, there was his blacksmith background, and the sword did not have any drawbacks, either. Thinking about it and seeing Poulter's confidence as he grabbed the polearm gave him an idea. By the way, if you can handle this one, I might also have a shield that goes with it, the blacksmith added with a smirk. A shield, too? The dwarf asked like a little and excited child. His former roughness was gone. You could also take a look at this spear. They might all come in handy. The real problem is that dragon, Hubert exclaimed loudly and brought Seth back to the present. The other had been talking about ways to get rid of the dragon. The most obvious was Caleb, the dragon rider. But the man in question instantly shot down this idea. There was no way for his skills to work on an ancient zombie dragon controlled by an overpowered necromancer. How about the core worm? Seth threw into the conversation. He remembered the signals. What? Everyone called out. Half because they didn't know what the beast was, the other half because they knew what it was, and Seth had to be crazy to try and use it. If we can make that colossal sea dragon fight the zombie dragon for us, we can proceed as planned, the blacksmith asserted. How are we even supposed to find it? Hubert asked. That's the easy part. It is actually much closer than you may think. The question is, who do we send to lure it there? The bard asked and looked in a specific direction. When the people at the campfire followed his gaze, they immediately realized who he was looking at. Yes, there was no one better fit for such a heroic act of bravery. If this works, we can proceed with the original plan. Megan cheered happily. Right, if both sides have weapons of mass destruction, it evens the battlefield, Ellie whispered sinisterly, rubbing her hands. It seemed like the slime rancher couldn't wait to watch a real kaiju battle. Not quite, if this works, we should even be able to add on to the original plan. Seth opened up to them. He let them in on the little secret of how he was able to know the core worm's location and why this was important to the plan. It explained what he meant by adding into the plan and why he would dare to think of using the beast. They had already seen and heard too much that day to be surprised anymore. All that was left was to share their plan with the others during the meal. When they started cooking, Cade, Twinkle, and Misto returned from setting up the safety measures. Bad news. The ruins are covered in trap formations. Twinkle reported. Cade nodded beside her. They had scouted a little after finishing their work. They were laid by one from our party. He was an expert in these things, but I saw a lot of it over last week. I'm sure I can make a way without him noticing. But it will take some time to unravel those, she pondered. That comes in handy. We can use some time. They shared their plan with the newcomers. Although they looked at them as if they were crazy at first, after listening for a while they also agreed that this was their best chance. When the hero and others finished training and finally joined the rest of the group for the meal, the hero found a brave and heroic task already forced onto him by the majority of the party. All that was left was to wait for their chance and Twinkle to open a way for them. Chapter 450. Is that all? While Twinkle opened a path, the others made sure to rest and prepare. Megan and Hubert used recorders to keep an eye on the camp at the cliff. I don't know what is going on, but they assembled maybe 50 or 60 people at the cliff, Hubert shouted, causing everyone to assemble around him to look at the little handheld screen. Even with the illusion CAD had cast onto them, the two operators didn't dare to get too close to avoid detection. They were still close enough to notice the sudden change. A young woman had stepped close to the cliff and was talking to a recorder. Cranking up the volume they were able to listen to her speech. She was mocking the Empire about how she killed all their champions. Showing off her booty and the giant zombie dragon. If these are all the undead participants, then I'm confident that our plan will work. She's confident that nobody can face her now. It's the time to strike. Poulter commented. Her little speech was the signal for them to move. Watching Nadina broadcast her speech to Krina gave the blacksmith an idea. If she was broadcasting to Krina, then maybe his signals would also manage to get through? The Empire might send help. Another backup plan was always good. He was about to set up the recorder he hijacked as spatial markers when he halted. With a smile, he also remembered one of the secondary reasons he agreed to be recorded. The broadcasting stations were required to pay the participants part of the revenue. What if? He left 3 recorders as coordinates, while he sent his and Ellie's to record the situation. He had just sent one to the cliff when Harker finally appeared at the scene. Krina. The audience was spellbound by what was happening. From the ocean behind the hero appeared a beast, not inferior in size to the dragon. The residents of the Empire were shocked. Not everyone knew of the core worm that had been chasing the party from Earth for days. It was a sea serpent said to be immortal and ever-growing for all its life. Although not as well known, they were almost on par with many true dragon races. The scene changed from the second giant beast charging at the shore, to the perspective of the hero, who was frantically scaling the cliff, and those above trying to stop him. Ha! Is this lizard the reason you were so confident earlier? Watch me add this one to my army, too. Kalsmere, bring me the corpse of this worm, she shouted for the hero below to hear. Nadina's manic laughter echoed on the cliff. The hero, who had no problem evading the ranged attack, was hit by gusts of wind and almost lost his grip, as the enormous dragon above started flapping its rotten wings. The gigantic zombie dragon sluggishly lifted into the air. The perspective cut back, showing the giant figure covering the sky as it dove down at the equally as mighty beast in the sea below. For the first time, its attention left the hero's figure at the cliff and the beast lifted its head to observe the zombie dragon. The broadcast cut back to the hero, in time for the audience to hear Nadina's voice. Little hero, is that all you've got? Last time you barely survived with the support of the slave Mansa and now you come alone, she scolded from above, as Harker was hard-pressed to evade the attacks without falling to his death. New information further drew in the attention of the audience. Only Princess Lena and the other women at her table had a guess. Nadina was probably talking about the time when Elsa was forced to return. On the big screen, the hero looked up to her, but his full helmet betrayed no emotions. Only shadows staring at her face. Phase 2. A loud voice traveled over the cliff when the dragon and the worm were fully locked in combat. Oh, thank God, the expressionless Helm exclaimed. The relief was audible in the hero's voice as he let go of the cliff and vanished in midair. An uproar went through the crowd on the street. The epic hero had just run away from the demon lord. Kavati Koinen. Nadina's eyes widened, too. The brave and heroic adversary she had expected to face her in a last cinematic fight for her dominance, suddenly ran away. How anticlimactic! The champions of justice she and the audience wished for were not as far away as she would have thought. Kate and Yvette, for example, were also at the cliff, and it was they who extracted the hero in the same way they had dropped the guard back on Bazilark. Still, seeing the two weapons of mass destruction fighting each other in the ocean gave Seth goosebumps. The dragon was massive, but the sea serpent was nothing to scoff at either. These were really powers on a continental level. They were just lucky that both of them were more or less mindless beasts. Maybe it would have been different if either of them used magic against the other, but it didn't. At the moment, they were caught up in an equal battle at the shore. Now that the hero managed to deceive Nadina into attacking the core worm on her own accord and the dragon and sea dragon were fighting their own battle, Phase 2 could commence. Also known as the original plan. Using voice of Seth, Seth gave the signal. They were back at the start and still needed to reveal more about Nadina's powers before they would step up to risk their lives. It was obvious that she was a kind of necromancer, but they had no idea about the troops she still kept hidden. The purple portals that the undead used to escape were more than enough evidence for them to stay wary. Phase 2 relied on Seth and Ellie. Krana. People were glued to the screens. The recorder close to Nadina focused on the shore. After the sudden call for a change of plans, the ocean started broiling once again. Grotesque creatures surfaced from the ruins of the sunken capital. As if its inhabitants came back to life after centuries on the seafloor, as unholy sea creatures. A bizarre collection of big monsters covered in mud, sand, and seaweed walked onto the beach and filled the gaps between the ruins. Exhibiting irregular numbers of heads, limbs, torsos, faces, eyes, and other body parts in random variations. At their front stood an especially big one made of rock, brick, and flowing sand. Are those golems? Lena asked unsurely. Those should be Seth soups, Elsa mumbled unwittingly, earning the scolding glances of Finn and Mina. The ice mage immediately realized that she had let a secret slip. Are you saying he is able to make golems like that? Lena kept digging craftily. She could only lament that she knew too little about this blacksmith. I'm not saying anything, Elsa exclaimed in a hurry and fell silent, not talking anymore. Lena focused on Elsa and made a mental note but returned to looking at the screen. On one hand, there was the battle of two giant mindless beasts of legends ripping and tearing at each other in the ocean. On the other, were a bunch of bizarre beings, looking like abstract statues of the abominations of this world, charging across the sunken ruins and up the cliff. What are those things? Destroy them, they heard the confused Nadina order the undead participants. These sparks promptly began shooting at the climbing golems as they did with the hero before. Nobody evaded this time. Undeterred by the ranged attacks, the golems kept climbing. Any damage they received was repaired at a speed visible to the naked eye. Especially the big guy at the head easily tanked most of the attacks. When they inevitably reached the edge of the cliff, many of the undead and Nadina looked toward the ruins. A little slower, the recorder also panned over to show the ruins. As if the marine unit's arrival was a signal, another group of similar but clean golems and hundreds of slimes appeared from the ruins of the old capital behind them. The golems alone numbered more than double that of the participants. Beside them was an uncountable number of slimes, facing Nadina and her sparks. It seemed like the necromancer had been surrounded and outnumbered. Humph, is that all? Nadina mumbled. Chapter 451. Phase 2. Right, Phase 2 was to force Nadina to reveal her hidden strength with a bunch of cannon fodder. What necromancer could deny a comparison in numbers? From the sea came the golems he had originally left in Ahaz. He had given them the command to follow sometime after the Blood Sun because he didn't want to stomach the loss. Although these souls were weird patchworks, they were big, and he was sure he could have refined them once he was back home. Even if he had turned them into golems, he would have at least wanted to bring them back home with him. He came up with a daring move when the beast started following them everywhere. During the chaos on Bazilark, he used the chance to have them grab onto the beast. Ever since Bazilark they had made their way through the ocean piggybacking on the core worm. This terrifying sea beast became a troop transporter for the blacksmith. He had revealed their existence for the sake of Phase 2. With these in addition to the golems he had made during the journey in preparation for the original plan, the group was sure they could bind the forces of the undead participants. While the newly made ones were slightly weaker, Seth estimated that the Marines had a combat power equivalent to Enleve 60 to 70 amalgamation after the combat in Ahaz. In addition, they had the numerical advantage and the ability to heal. Facing this force, Seth and the others were sure that Nadina couldn't help but reveal some more of her powers. Although he felt it was a shame to use them here, the one who would really suffer from Phase 2 was probably Ellie. He felt bad for her since they had to ask for such a sacrifice from the slime rancher, but the situation was dire. However, Seth didn't have time to watch for long, he had to get ready for Phase 3. Or Plan B if things didn't work out. Krana. Seeing more and more slimes pour out of the ruins cover, the necromancer started laughing hysterically. Lena observed even closer. This was the time when the master of the undead would be forced to reveal her cards. The fact that she saw it on screen meant that Hardwig and the other had already screened it. The more information they had, the better they could deal with the situation. It also meant that, as long as the broadcast was running, they were winning. You must be crazy. Didn't your mommy tell you not to fight a necromancer with numbers? Enough of this farce, she said the magic words. The legendary dialogue of every necromancer, ever. As everyone in the audience expected, it was time for the army of the dead to make an entrance. Though the iteration of this event still managed to surprise the onlookers. A portal, or rather a several hundred meters long wall of purple fog appeared parallel to the cliff. From within exited a massive number of skeletons and zombies of all kinds of ranks and levels. A squirming ocean of rotten flesh and bare bones clad in rusty and damaged armor. Those in the front with the lowest levels wore the simple clothes of farmers or citizens. Nadina had been hard at work and not picky with her victims. They were most likely locally sourced. Then came zombies and skeleton soldiers and knights. Slimes poured in from the ruins like a tsunami of goo. Walking Dead exited from the portal, a rolling wave of death. The audience felt a weird discrepancy. Slimes and skeletons aside from goblins were some of the most common low-level mobs. No matter how grand the scene or high the numbers, it shouldn't have been able to compete with the giant kaiju fight going on involving a legendary zombie dragon and a colossal sea serpent. Still, seeing thousands of low-level mobs locked in an epic battle for survival, their sacrifice, their misery, and their desperate fights, the audience was captivated. Despite the giant monster battle, that was causing tsunamis and crushing ruins as the sea quaked under their beastly roars, the scene stayed on the battle of the low lives. Showing the valiant efforts of the slimes versus the undead. Among the slime and skeleton, they also saw the struggle between golems and sparks. The undead sparks faced the grotesque golems, and many lost their lives in the wake of their fights. Neither side cared about the slimes they squashed or skeletons they caught in their attacks. As the audience watched in rapture, the scene was suddenly accentuated by background music. Kavati Koinen. Not all sparks were equally powerful. While some had their problems with the giants, others like the heroes easily dealt with several at the same time. However, the plan had worked. The undead participants were held back by the golems and Nadina had revealed her undead. It seems like this is as far as it goes, Seth commented grimly. You are saying that as if it's nothing. Look at the powers she has under her belt. Twinkle complained. My poor babies. Ellie whined at the side. It was hard for her to send her babies into this battle. I believe I can see Death Knights and a lich in the back, Herbert commented, observing the handheld screen. Should we proceed now, or should we wait a little longer? Twinkle asked Seth. The blacksmith looked at Ellie, who had a hard time watching her babies die. Let's commence with Phase 3 now, he concluded. Unbeknownst to everyone except the party, there was a third type of golem. They were rectangular boxes, walking on four segmented tentacles that ended in claws. With the legs they walked and climbed across the ruins, hiding among the masses of slimes. While nobody was watching, they had surrounded the whole army. The bard entered the stage. Are you sure about this song? Ounce asked him, looking at the scale of the enemy army. I definitely won't open Pandora's box in this kind of scenario. You might not be able to stop it. It's still safer. With that, he finally started playing. A captivating beat echoed through the battlefield. Slowly its volume rose, amplified by the loudspeaker golems that had taken their position. With the rising volume, the situation of the battle changed as all participants fell into a dance routine. The tragic battle of skeletons and slimes became a trade-off between the skeleton dance and the blob dance. One side was caught in an almost innocent dance, while the other was erratically moving and jumping. The undead could do nothing at the wave of slimes buried them in the silly dance routine. Nadina and the champions were also dancing, while the golems were unaffected. In theory, they were items. They could not be affected by music. What is this nonsense? Stop this! Stop this immediately, the necromancer cried as her body kept moving all on its own. A rough and alien voice started off, as if on cue. Consciously, she was unable to understand the words. But unconsciously, she could hear her own voice, whisper to her in her mind. Stop the rock? Stop the rock? Can't stop the rock. You can't stop the rock, her own voice berated her, singing the same over and over. This ballad was also calling upon the demon god Paimon, but it was slightly different from the one called Pandora's Box. The bard was the pivot point of the song could not go out of control. It was already out of control from the start, as even Seth himself could not stop the singing out of his own accord. The song compelled enemy and ally to dance, while allies would provide power to strengthen the effects. Seth could not stop the song until all hostiles affected were eliminated or he lost consciousness. This was Phase 3, aptly titled Dance Parade. While everyone was forced into a lyric dance-off to the death, the unaffected golems caused mayhem among the undead participants in the higher ranks of the necromancer's army. Of course, the stronger the target was, the harder it was to affect them. The stronger sparks and powerful undead were still able to put up a fight with the golems, despite being compelled to dance. The rest of the team watched from afar, their ears thoroughly plugged, so they would not be affected. If Seth can keep this up, we might not even need Phase 4. Megan jinxed it. You jinxed it. Thomas confirmed. Chapter 452. My turn. Krana. Seeing the tragic battle take such a radical turn, the audience was confused about how they were supposed to feel. The music caused a restless urge to dance along, but the scene of dancing skeletons and slimes was awkward. It became clear that Nadina the necromancer was not used to the quick rhythmic dance moves, and sweat quickly drenched her elegant black dress. She wound her body in more and more indecent poses. Ugh, this humiliation, she pressed out in exhaustion. Let's get down and dirty. Enough, her shriek finally broke past the music and the battlefield suddenly fell silent. Kavati Koinen. Silence reigned on the battlefield. Kneeling on the ground, a quiet buzzing sound filled Seth's ears. A mouthful of blood splattered on the rock at his feet, as a terrible pain flooded through his body. His eyes dilated. His health gauge was more than halved and he even lost consciousness for a moment when the pain kicked in. Everything happened in an instant. A figure had rushed out of the purple fog and struck Seth before he even registered what was going on. Was it a sword that struck his abdomen? He had to thank Thomas later. Ding! You have acquired the skill Pain Resistance Leave 1. A skill Seth had never wished for because of the pain threshold it needed. The pain only mildly lowered, however, he woke up thanks to the golden fleece quickly healing his wound. It was thanks to the fortune teller that he was prepared. Although Thomas could not tell them everything that would happen, the fortune teller had already warned them that Phase 4 would not be enough. Thanks to the fortune teller's warning, he wore his full equipment below the sky robe. Despite all the reflection effects of the wyvern cuirass, he had still suffered this much damage. However, the figure at his side was more miserable than him. In his stupor, Seth registered unworldly screams of pain and madness beside him. A terrible, rotting cut crushed the attacker's armor and almost split him in half. At the same time, he was engulfed in colorless flames that devoured and withered his undead flesh. Quick, strike him down! What are you doing? What have you done to my hero? Nadina shrieked in horror across the battlefield. In the end, she was still hiding some of her power. Another undead hero. No wonder this figure was able to strike him down this quickly. However, the hero could not follow her order. The curse reflect, damage reflect, and the torturing madness had activated and were quickly returning the attacker to death. Seth had suffered, but it had cost Nadina one of her aces. Seeing him slowly stand up again, aggravated her. Gah! Did you think this was all? I have not even started. Subjecting me to such heinous acts. I will no longer hold back. You will all suffer, she exclaimed, incensed by the loss. The undead army and the suffering hero were swallowed in a purple haze as the necromancer buffed her subordinates. It did not stop there. The portal behind her grew, not in length but in height. The blacksmith looked at the guy beside him. Despite the curses, the undead once again lifted his weapon above Seth's head. The buff could not counteract the curse, but the undead was once again following her orders. When his weapon was about to fall, Seth got ready to dodge, but the hero was suddenly split from shoulder to hip by a mighty blade. As the undead finally fell apart, it revealed the pole-axe-wielding dwarf behind him. The strike of the pole-axe was the unplanned start of Phase 4, The all-out battle. Thanks, he expressed his gratitude hastily and looked back to the battlefield. He scowled when he noticed that most of his loudspeaker golems had been shut down. The bard would be unable to help much with music on the battlefield. The other team members had entered the battlefield and started fighting. Ben Harker had ridden into battle on a Pegasus and managed to immediately strike down one of the undead heroes using the sword Seth had given him. Similarly, Caleb had also easily reaped the lives of some undead participants using the spear, made of the same archangel. The others like Kate and Ellie made similar progress. Even Brock and Marcel managed to deal damage to the preoccupied Sparks. Twinkle, Hubert, Megan, Rich, and Yvette stayed at the ruins to give support from the back. This was their original formation to deal with the eventualities Thomas had warned them from. And it worked surprisingly well. Not only the participants but large amounts of undead were quickly mowed down by his comrades right now, they had an overwhelming advantage. Still, even as her Sparks and undead died, Nadina only laughed. Under his shocked gaze, the situation changed before Seth could act and join them. Hiding some of her power? Far from it. The purple portal had grown to over 10 meters in height, and from its depth came another army. Undead abominations, amalgamations, hell knights, and other titanic undead beasts marched onto the battlefield. She opened the floodgates of hell. Ha ha ha. You will all die and join my power, she announced maniacally. She had hidden most of her power, not just some of it. The wave of new soldiers charged into combat and started turning the flow of battle in their favor. It took only 2 or 3 undead amalgamations or 1 hell knight to keep a golem busy. Although they could heal, they would go on standby when their energy was depleted. Slowly, their number dwindled. They had gotten a good head start, but with the entry of fresh forces their advantage was lost, and the undead Sparks made their comeback. Although their number had shrunken by half, each individual was a strong opponent on their own. In the mass of enemies, team members like Caleb on his Wyvern, or Harker on his Pegasus could still hold their high ground. Once they got serious, the undead amalgamations were not a hindrance to them, and they engaged in battles with the Sparks. Weaker members like Brock, Ellie, and Marcel did not dare to deal with the danger and had to retreat to the rear. The Slimes, who had done a good job against the enemies so far, could do nothing to stop the big guns. There were only a few very powerful Slimes, and they were at Ellie's side. They pulled back their forces to create a line of defense together with Poulter and the others in front of the ruins. Only Cade, Caleb, and Harker were left on the battlefield. With their flying mounts, they kept swooping in to reap lives. Pets were one of the few advantages, as the undead seemed to lack any such support. Shit, it's the thing that destroyed the vessel. Hubert suddenly called out as a huge shadow left the portal. A bone dragon. Megan called out. She was right, it was a giant beast, resembling a dragon but completely formed from a mass of bones. It had the shape of a dragon but lacked in size and aura when compared to the zombie dragon that was locked in a dogfight with the core worm. With a dissonant cry, it entered the battlefield and charged at the 3 champions who had reigned supreme over the airspace up to now. Go, Nidhogg! Bring me their corpses! Nadina commanded domineeringly, and the beast shone in an almost crimson light. Harker attacked it from afar, but his attacks were suddenly blocked by barriers and could not harm the beast. Seeing even the hero's attacks being useless, the 3 got ready to retreat, when a thick ray of pure light hit the bone dragon's back. It penetrated the shield and set the beast aflame. It barely managed to catch its fall and stayed in the air. Finally, time for the great me to show you how it's done. The Eye-Visor commented egotistically. Above the unholy beast, appeared the nightmare centipede, servant of the Sunday. Even if it was not his sun god, Puffles gained a massive boost in power, using the pre-existing curse woven into the rays of light. Following the preemptive attack, the Eye-Visor dived down, his body clad in a holy aura, and directly tackled Nidhogg. Hundreds of sharp, ceramic white legs penetrated the shield that surrounded the beast and dug into its body. Like a constrictor, the chylopod wrapped itself around the bone dragon and both plummeted to the ground, Puffles' territory. Unfortunately, also the undead's territory. Stop that ugly thing! Help Nidhogg, the necromancer commanded, and Puffles was swarmed by the undead abominations. Although Puffles was mighty and great, he was locked in battle with the bone dragon and could do little against the siege. He would cast shields or AoE skills while struggling to finish off the Nidhogg. It was enough against the slow abominations, but more and more strikes from the nimble Hell Knights hit and scratched his pristine carapace. His angry hissing echoed across the battlefield. In a hurry, Seth commanded the last operable golems to hurry to Puffles' defense. Puffles, we will help, the hero called out, steering his Pegasus to charge at the crowd attacking Puffles. No, you don't. Nadina denied, and swarms of skeletal flying beasts exited the portal to harass the three in the air. Haha. Bard. Your shitty golems can't change anything. I want you to watch as I mutilate your precious pet and turn it into one of mine, she taunted. His fist balled tightly, but he kept himself under control. He had already prepared their escape, what they needed was time. Oh yeah, is this all you can do? The bard taunted back, his voice oozing with contempt. The necromancer had kept pulling cards out of her sleeve. Since she wanted to talk, Seth decided to talk. Tatzel, your turn, he asked the emoji to blast the pesky flies off of Puffles' back, but the situation suddenly changed. I see you are still unconvinced. Let me help you plunge into the depths of despair, she called out. She waved her hand. A huge number of skills were activated. Paper talismans flew out to cover part of the battlefield in various formations. The undead received several buffs and many were suddenly covered in unique barriers in addition to the necromancer and lich's strengthening. Wait, isn't that the skill of Lu? Megan exclaimed in shock at the sight. Poulter and Caleb in the air cursed. I am the champion of the goddess of death Kali. All the souls of those who die as my subordinates, return to me and I can absorb their strength and skills. Nobody will come to help you. Nothing can save you or your pet. Now, watch in despair as... Tunk. An arrow aiming for her forehead was deflected by a barrier just millimeters before it hit. You asked for this, he said, incensed. Chapter 453. Big Farmer. Krana. Now, watch in despair. Her monologue was cut off. Suddenly the broadcast cut off. The broadcasting screens turned black. Lena's heart dropped. We have to go to the palace immediately, she exclaimed to the ladies. That the broadcast was cut off could only mean two things to her. Either their side was losing, or something happened to the recorder on the other side. Both were bad news. The princess, Elsa, Mina, and Finn pushed their way through the confused crowd and hurried back to the palace. No guards dared to stop the rushing princess or the people in her company. They charged into the censorship department, where the material was cited before being broadcasted. Why, your highness? What? One of the censors jumped up in shock, as the four ladies dashed in. Where is Hardwig? What happened? Why did you break off the broadcast? The signal of the two recorders that were observing the situation was lost. His Highness Hardwig is preparing a teleport formation to send a team of elite reinforcements, the censor quickly answered her question. Following his directions, Lena brought the girls to meet with Hardwig. They found the prince in a courtyard, surrounded by court wizards. The other princess involved. Brother, how is it? She asked out of breath. Lena? What are you doing here? He asked confused. The broadcast just cut off, so we hurried here to find out what was going on, she explained. Hardwig nodded and explained the situation. We still have the coordinates of 3 of the recorders. Once the formation is ready, we can send reinforcement. Who are we sending? Father agreed to send Uncle Andre and a group of the Imperial Order, he told her seriously. She let out a gasp of relief, before finding the other 3 looking at her in confusion. Uncle Andre was actually the brother of their grandfather who reached the status of a legend, while the Imperial Order was the elites under the direct order of the Imperial family. They only have to endure until the formation was ready. As long as the reinforcements arrived in time, there was no need to worry about something like a zombie dragon, or even the undead army. Why are you suddenly so relaxed? That only counts if they make it in time. In the meantime, a lot of people could die. Mina argued. I can assure you we are doing our best. I am sure they are still doing fine. Hardwig tried to lift the mood. Kavati Koinen. You asked for this, the bard interrupted her. The worm swung a spear, and a sudden sandstorm covered the battlefield, taking her sight. Naden reacted quickly and used the talisman formation to dispel the wide area magic. Whom? She heard the sound of impact from far within the storm. It took just a moment for her to regain sight, but at this moment a group of knights had appeared beside the insect monster and drew her attention. All of them were big and wore imposing armor. With heights ranging between 3 to 8 meters, they seemed short compared to the surrounded undead. Despite the size difference, she watched her army get cut down. Whom? Again, she heard the impact, and this time she also heard the bone dragon's wails. Among the knights in the encirclement of undead was Nidhogg, still struggling with the centipede, but there was one more person standing on its head. When had the bard gotten there? What is going on? She was thinking when the man suddenly raised a hammer. She could see the light of souls swirling around it. In panic, she hurried the undead to rush in, but they couldn't get closer to help. The wall of shields and weapons decimated any beats that got too close. She saw the bard attack, a practiced motion without superfluous movements. Whoom! The hammer struck the bone dragon's skull and smashed it. A sudden void spread within her. She felt an unknown emptiness. No! She screamed in shock when a nightmare became true. She felt her connection to Nidhogg being cut. The creature had died before, but like with all of them, their souls usually returned to her. It was unthinkable, but the connection with Nidhogg's soul was cut. Her pet was gone. The hammer had crushed the bone dragon's skull and the man had climbed on the insect's back, as Nidhogg's body turned into a pile of bones. A crazy fire burned in the bard's eyes as he turned back to her with a sardonic grin. Oh, did you see that? You dispelled the sandstorm quicker than expected. Did you notice something? He spread his arms as if gesturing around him. Quicker and quicker, the big knights in shining armor cut down the undead. It didn't matter whether they were amalgamations, hell knights, or other high-ranking undead. She noticed it. Despite so many dying, none of their souls returned to her. The cycle was broken. Your shitty undead can't change anything. I made you watch as I mutilated your precious pet, he mocked her. Her own words cut deep into her heart. Burning rage grew in her chest. Again and again, this bitch kept insulting her dignity. She was the champion of the goddess of death and destruction. She was destined to become the mightiest necromancer in history. She started burning the souls of the sparks to absorb their skills and further strengthen her undead. No matter how good your golems are, you will not leave this place alive, she swore, and the undead jumped at the golem knights, like rats into the deep fryer. The only ones they struggled to dispatch were the scattered sparks that locked with the knight in duels. It didn't matter how many she lost, she had the advantage in numbers. There was no way she was interrupted as if her thought were read. I bet you are thinking I have the advantage in numbers, right? It's true. Never fight a necromancer in numbers. Then what if I fight you with quality? He asked a weird question. Her eyes widened when the man waved his hand and an almost 40-meter tall giant knight appeared. It was really a giant. A giant clad in leather, chain mail, and parts of plate armor. At his waist, he had a more than 20 meters long sword. But the giant did not use the sword. In his hands was a giant scythe. Before she could question why it carried a farming tool, it started reaping the undead like tall grass. What kind of wicked being would come up with the idea to arm a giant with a scythe? Severed limbs and torsos flew through the air as the giant drew bloody circles on the battlefield. Compared to Kalsmere, this would have been like a human facing a mammoth. But the dragon wasn't here. Even when she tried to call it back, it didn't listen. There was nothing on her side that could size up against the giant golem. The only relief was that the dead from the scythe still returned to her. She should be able to do something with this. Puffles, let's get out of here quickly. Things will go down soon. Seth warned the Ivisor. All right, and. Thanks. Puffles said, a little embarrassed. He had underestimated the fully buffed bone dragon. What is there to thank? We are a team. There is no way I would let you suffer. While Nadina was distracted by the giant, Seth quickly returned his golem knights to his inventory and boarded Puffles. The blacksmith looked at his teammates who were just floating in place and staring at the giant farmer harvesting life, the same way Nadina did. What are you staring at? Don't just stay in the air. Retreat. Hurry, Seth called out to his comrades and took the lead on Puffles to return to their defensive line. They didn't have much time to run. Although he had bragged a lot, the giant could only operate for a short while, because of the huge energy consumption. Seth had lacked the materials to turn the giant into anything more than a huge distraction. He was sure Nadina was already planning something. Seth didn't want to be there when things went downhill. Literally. Back behind their defensive line at the edge of the ruins, he called out for the demon Misto, who materialized beside him shortly after. Plan C won't work. She has a permanent shield erected around her. You won't be able to approach her undetected, even with the helm. Seth said with a sigh and held his hand open. I see, here. The demon agreed and returned the whimsical curse to him. Assassinating Nadina with the whimsical curse had been another backup plan, but the arrow shot had shown that this plan would not work. You had something like this and kept it hidden until now, the hero scolded when Misto and Seth joined the others. Because I would have preferred not to use an unfinished prototype. Look, he said and pointed at the battlefield where the giant started faltering. Time was up and energy started running out. The big zombies started climbing and attacking the sluggish golem, like malevolent toddlers. Things got worse. Zombies' corpses on the battlefield started withering and their loose bones collected on the other side of the battlefield. Necromancer Girl was far from done. It seemed that Nadina was going to summon something big, and a giant pile of bones piled up beside her. She's summoning a new bone dragon. Megan the archaeologist analyzed as if she had seen the process before. What are we going to do? Phase 4 failed. Brock lamented. Then, we should charge her and fight valiantly to the death. Maybe we can kill her in a quick skirmish, Harker suggested. You really want to kill us? Seth was speechless. Dear hero, please let Mr. Smith speak. I believe his preparation has merit. Please share your plans with us, the fortune teller suddenly backed him up. Okay. We run, he agreed and started explaining what was soon going to happen. Chapter 454. Big Mama. A few weeks prior, Delta. The giant was a disappointment. Something this big isn't worth it without a fitting soul, he lamented, looking at the 40-meter-tall giant knight in the golem hangar. At this size, the compatibility of the soul to the body also became a question. The blacksmith had used a massive snake soul to operate the giant. This had worked on similarly sized snakes, but it was barely able to sustain the giant for 10 to 20 minutes. The lack in synergy between the soul and the item it was used on became a big question when it came to golems. Something he had never experienced with weapons. Sure, a synergy was a great power-up, but things usually worked just fine without it, too. Tatzel, I will need your help with something. There is someone I have to introduce to you. There was no way around it. If he wanted to create a real trump card that could substitute for Alzalsar, this was the only way. However, before he, once again, spent weeks on making something that wouldn't work, he needed to gain her cooperation. Who? The snakelet asked curiously. Your birth mother. Kavati Koinen. The giant pile of bones beside her was growing and finally taking the shape of a dragon. Maybe 20 meters in height and 50 in length. Almost double the size Nidhogg once was. It still ached her heart to have lost the partner that accompanied her for this long. Although the giant seemed to have problems, she wouldn't leave anything to chance. She kept strengthening it using the various skills she had absorbed from the sparks, such as enchantment. This bone dragon would make short work of the giant and then crush that cocky bard once and for all. As she was concentrating on her new baby, her undead horde surged against the ramshackle defense line. The ugly golems and slimes had been reinforced by the golem knights and the sparks that fled back. At some point, they even erected an earth wall as a fortification. Did they try to buy time? It mattered not. Time was her ally, too. She was confident that Kalsmir would be able to deal with the sea monster. Everything was over once he returned if things had not ended at that time. Even if they had another way to counter the new bone dragon, with all the souls she had absorbed back, she had an almost infinite mana pool. She could just keep summoning undead and resurrecting bone dragons. A crazed smile appeared on her lips, as she dreamed of subduing that cocky bard. She would be his master and he would grovel at her feet, creating an army of golems at her bidding. Nadina would savor it, to humiliate him as a lowly servant as revenge for making her dance in such a humiliating way to his tunes. Hey, necromancer girl, a voice causing seething hatred to bubble up, suddenly called out to her. It was the cocky bard, who had stepped onto the earth wall. Are you wasting materials on creating trashy undead again? What is that going to be, a bone dragon? Is that all you can do? He mocked her. She tried to ignore him. Nadina had to concentrate. Soon his words would get stuck in his throat. Cat got your tongue? You were so talkative earlier. Well, it doesn't matter. I actually only wanted to tell you two things. One of the things I always respected, no matter how powerful I have gotten since the world changed, was fall damage. And, we already bought enough time. Suddenly a huge area of the ruins sank, and a giant head broke through the surface of the earth as if it was water. Like a sandworm in the desert, a never-ending body emerged from the earth until the head was suspended roughly 100 meters above the ground. Massive crystalline eyes observed the battlefield from a bare skull covered in armor. The gaze fixed on her and the almost finished bone dragon as if they were a frog. The beats roared and an unimaginable pressure descended on her and the army. Ding! You are facing a deity. All stats are reduced by 20%. A few weeks prior, Delta. It had taken hours of talks and persuasions until they finally came to an agreement and Seth could start working on her body. Their relationship had actually turned quite amicable after talking things out. They all just wanted the best for Tatzel and the patriarch decided to forgive him, for the chance to protect her child once again. However, they both agreed that this would not be a resurrection. Her original boy was strong, but Seth intended for it to be even stronger. During his work on the golems, he found one of the fastest growing skills was reinforce, which he used to strengthen the bones, used as the base for the golem knights. The skill had already risen to level 7 when he started his work on the matriarch's body. The first step was to thoroughly reinforce every one of her bones. Over 300 meters of ribs and vertebra. Even with Cerberus helping, it had taken them almost 2 weeks. Seth's skill has evolved to advanced reinforce, craftsman, leave 2. Energy circulation, 2, had also risen to leave 9. It was the first but also the longest step. Following the reinforcements of the bones, which already imbued the skeleton with several affinities and resistances thanks to the bestowal effects of Karen's obol. The bard abstained from using any smithing ballads on the bones since he simply lacked the endurance to keep going for so long. He made the excuse to himself, that too many magical effects would also get in the way of each other. Since it was a pseudo-swamp dragon in life, it had a high affinity for water and earth to begin with. There were few metals with water affinity, this was why Seth used Wagram and Olympian silver to cover the bones in the needed circuits to turn it into a functional vessel. The blacksmith mostly used rare Olympian silver because it was the only material he could create reliably with little material costs. Little was relative, as ordinary silver was cheap compared to any materials used for equipment. His hours spent on refining the silver at the edge of the magma furnace did not stay without results. Seth's ability pyrokinesis reached leave 9. The circuits of Wagram and Olympian silver did not only improve earth affinity and durability, but also the overall magic conductivity. After finishing the basic framework, came the bodywork. One of the first things he made were the eyes. Seth used the charged aquamarine he had once looted at the Theocracy's stronghold. It had a high affinity to water and was a material usually used as the nucleus of wands. As for the fangs, while reinforcing the several hundred sword-like teeth, most of them experienced the blood drinker treatment. The rest, the 4 main fangs and some other more vicious fangs, were enchanted with decay and penetration. For the beast's body armor, he used the matriarch's own leather using advanced reinforce to harden it. This time he used smithing ballads and etching to further strengthen its pseudo-draconic trait of damage reflection and once again the affinity to earth and water. Her head, where the main core would be placed, was covered in long overlapping plates of artificial adamantium making it look almost feathered. When he finally finished the vessel, came the most important step. Are you ready? Don't forget our deal. Yes. I won't. After a last check, Seth began the infusion of the pseudo-swam dragon matriarch's soul into the cores of her body. Because of the incredible length, Seth had prepared several subcores to enable a smooth control, similar to secondary brains. Splitting off parts of the souls, he walked down the 300-meter-long body and animated one subcore at a time. Finally, the blacksmith crawled into the skull, where the casing for the main core was placed. The core itself used the snake's original monster core, but it was enveloped in a sphere of adamantium, like a black box. With intense anticipation, after weeks of work, the blacksmith infused the matriarch's soul. Ding! Your skill enchantment leave 5 has become enchantment leave 6. Ding! A synergy with your trait Olympian myths has strengthened your creation. Ding! Title: Divine Creator gained. You have managed to create an entity that possesses divinity plus 10% to all stats of your autonomous creations. Plus 5% to all your attributes. Ding! Your creation has drawn the attention of a god. Goddess Gaia has blessed your creation. Your trait Olympian myths has strengthened. Ding! Title: Acknowledged by the gods. A god has acknowledged your skills. All stats plus 10. One hidden effect. Several things happened at once as various effects covered the bone of the surrounding skull. Hey, let me out before you start stretching, the blacksmith called in a panic. The giant head had started shaking and he hurried to leave the snake's body as he jumped down and left through the gap between the head and the ribs. From outside he watched the colossal body rear its head. Chapter 455. Came in like a wrecking ball. Kavati Koinen. Fall damage. And we already bought enough time. He cued the finale. The next moment Tatzel's mom broke through the surface of the earth. Seth could not help but falter every time he saw its status. especially since he couldn't see all of it because of his level, despite being the creator. Python, the blessed imitation/seed leave. Trait, Blessing of Gaia, Arath travel, unlimited stamina, draconic complexion. Race, Deity Golem. Age, 0. Affiliation, Mar. Durability, 1000/1000. The result of craftsman Smith's dedication. A recreation of the perished Python, a deity on the verge of becoming a myth. Acknowledged and blessed by goddess Gaia, mother of Python. Huge cracks spread from the hole Python emerged from and ran along under the feet of the undead army, covering the whole cliffside. As the whole battlefield started shifting, breaking apart, Seth and Ellie collected what was left of their forces. Get in, guys! Hurry! With widened eyes, Nadina could only watch the battlefield break apart. Sudden gorges swallowed her soldiers and parts of the cliff broke away, falling onto the shore below. Feeling the ground below her shake, her concentration wavered. She was still in the middle of casting the Bone Dragon ritual. Unless she finished it, she would suffer a rebound. Nadina could only try to finish the ritual in a hurry, as taking too long and stopping would both be unfavorable. She couldn't even command her army back, as her hands were tied. Watching the world around her fall apart, she tried to hurry, but not rush the ritual. The more intelligent undead like Hell Knights and Liches didn't need her direct command to retreat into the portal, saving them and part of the lower ranks they controlled. However, the sluggish abomination, amalgamations, and similar giant but dumb beasts were lost. Her heart umped up her throat when she finally felt the ground under her feet sink. The whole cliff was tilting in slow motion before her eyes. Arise, Obhog, she managed to complete it just in time. The piece of the cliff she was standing on had already tilted. Finally able to move again, she rushed up the sliding piece of land on all fours. With a lunge, she grabbed the tail of the bone dragon. Go! Obhog, fly, she commanded in panic. The bony wings with ghostly membranes started flapping as the ground below their feet broke away. They had been almost drawn into the huge landslide that was now forming below. The roars and rumble of breaking stone and falling rock drowned out everything else. She couldn't even hear her own curses when she watched most of her army being literally crushed and buried. A massive part of the cliff was turning into a scree slope, with stones and boulder flowing into the sea. Everything fell apart and collapsed in itself. The debris crushed and buried the ruins below. Even the mighty dragon tower was swallowed in the avalanche of rock and land. The landslide caused a huge wave that traveled off into the ocean. Kalsmere! Nadina shrieked angrily. There was no answer. Looking to the sea, the two fighting giants had traveled a long distance and could still be seen wrestling with each other. What made her anxious was that it actually looked like the dragon was at a disadvantage. A dragon's advantage was their ability to fly, their mighty defense, and their natural affinity with magic. They bore the status of legend from birth. Even her skills as a champion of Kali were not enough to resurrect the dragon as more than a huge mindless zombie. It couldn't use magic. Its flesh had mostly rotted away, lowering its legendary defense. Still, its physical prowess and breath were enough to destroy anything below a legend. Everything except the worm. The mighty core worm had lured the zombie dragon open water. From the start, the two beasts had been locked in melee combat and the deep water was its territory. The dragon had a hard time resisting the long serpentine body wrapping around it. What was she supposed to do? Her thoughts raced, trying to come up with a plan. She was constantly distracted by the creeping panic and fear because of her failure. The oppressive feeling of having failed the expectations that were put on her. Her grandfather had relied on her, her father had paid a huge price to make those weapons. They had even gone as far as to mess up the Empire's plans with Krina. She had lost everything if she also lost. She had to retrieve at least Kalsmere and return. With at least that much, her family had a chance to survive. They might even have a chance to rise again. Nadina spurred Obhog and they flew in the direction of the fight between titans. Helping the bone dragon win was her only option. Even just helping it escape would be enough. Coming closer, she found that the core worm had significantly changed from before. Its large crocodile-like head was covered in extensive burns. The ugly, bulbous cluster of eyes was gone. There were only two intelligent and piercing eyes of a calculative predator. This was not a mindless beast that just instinctively fought and hunted, or lost its mind to the sun, as Seth and the others had guessed. The massive body restrained the struggling zombie dragon in the water and hindered it from lifting off in the air. The weakened defense was only a little hindrance for the worm, which was proficient in crushing huge prey like a constrictor. Even when the dragon tried to bite and claw and burn his way out, its attacks were blocked by a membrane of magic, close to the worm's skin. It was even using magic or skills. Getting closer, she suddenly heard a mighty laugh that shook the sea. Ha ha ha, are you the pest that turned Kalsmir into this shadow? Nadina's body turned cold. What was with this situation? Just an hour ago she had been at the top of the world. She had milked this place, assembled a huge army, talented undead, and even a zombie dragon. Her sparks were killed, and her army was mostly decimated. She had gained many skills, but it would take time to use them effectively. Time, she didn't have, because her zombie dragon was actually struggling against this beast, unable to help. Humph, if this was any other time, I would have punished you. But I got rid of some pesky parasites thanks to this fight. I will spare your life, but Kalsmir will stay with me. It's bad enough that someone like you has desecrated his tomb. Dispel your magic on him and you can leave, the booming voice said calmly. Nadina hesitated. I can't. Without the dragon. My family kya, she suddenly screamed. A highly condensed jet of water shot at them, and the bone dragon had to quickly evade, almost throwing off his summoner in the process. I believe the sun has gotten to you. You only have two choices. Release Kalsmir and leave and deal with your problems, or face certain death, he concluded the conversation. It was clear that she was dead if she spoke up again. Would it really end like this? Just releasing the spell that had cost her so much and leaving with empty hands? No. A fire burned in her eyes. She was a champion. She wouldn't follow the commands of some worm. Lifting her hand, she brandished a spear of lightning and shot it at the core worm to initiate the fight. She just had to distract the beast enough to free the zombie dragon. She would return with it and take revenge on that cocky bard and his weird snake. A deity? So, what? Even that thing would not be able to fight her dragon. In the end, you chose death. The worm mumbled, condescending. The next moment a ring of purple mist with black embellishments framing it appeared above their head and a group of levitating liches descended from it. The worm was quickly manned to swallow his word as a rain of high-level magic descended on him. Nadina was giving her all, burning the souls of the undead that were destroyed in the landslide. The sea dragon bombarded them with jets of water, but they were easily blocked by powerful shields. Nadina was not pulling her punches and did her best to utilize everything and free Kalsmir. Under her protection, the liches began to summon grand magic together. Unable to maneuver flexibly because of the giant hunk of a dragon that was still fighting against his embrace, the worm was forced to face the magic head-on. Ugh, you little, the core worm cursed as the liches hit him with strategic-grade magic that could wipe out a small town. While the liches dealt damage, Nadina did her best to utilize her own and her new skills. Several auras strengthened the undead dragon and formations were erected around the core worm. Despite the amount of power she used, it became a drawn-out battle and night soon fell. Finally, bombarded from all sides and influenced by several layers of negative statuses, the beast finally loosened his grasp on the dragon. Using the chance, the zombie shrunk its size and struggled free, following the command of its necromancer. Surrounded by cover fire, it returned to the air, leaving the range of the core worm, who could be heard cursing in the waters below. Ha ha ha, she laughed triumphantly as the dragon returned to the skies with her. The huge weight of her worries had fallen away, leaving her in euphoria. As long as she had Kalsmir, nobody could stop her. Accompanied by her mountainous dragon, Nadina Durnham returned to take revenge. Chapter 456. A shame. Using the reinforced ribs as benches, footholds, and ledges, the ragtag team was traveling through the earth inside the belly of Python. It was an impromptu plan and the blacksmith had never planned to use Python as a vehicle. That was why there were no actual seats installed. Are you sure we shouldn't get as far away as possible? If I have to fight that dragon, there are no guarantees that you get out alive. Python warned. Don't worry, this is the best hiding spot. Seth answered confidently. Are we really running away, just like that? Poulter asked disgruntled. The dwarf seemed unsatisfied with leaving the battle like this, despite the state they were in. They had tried confronting Nadina and returning home by fulfilling the quest, but she was too strong. There was no reason for them to actually risk their lives against her. Instead, they all had entered Python and used it as a subterranean train to flee. Don't worry, Poulter. Everything will be fine from now on. Thomas suddenly said. He somehow managed to stay seated in a lotus position, no matter how Python moved. It was as if his butt was glued to the bone below. How would you know that? Brock barked, stressed. He had been heavily wounded and barely managed to return to the defense line alive. The fortune teller frowned a little. Don't take it personally, Thomas. It's hard for others to believe your words. I know you are upset, Brock, but I can guarantee you that Thomas has never failed us. Even though his words are vague, he is usually right. Megan mediated. But how can things be all right? Rich asked in distraught. It seemed that the slave Manser held no confidence in their chance of survival. My guess would be, that the Krana Empire got our message, and they are preparing to send help. Right, Thomas? Seth intervened in the conversation. The fortune teller didn't answer and only smiled mysteriously. We reached our destination, Python informed him. Is that really necessary? Puffles lamented. Suddenly the train stopped. What going on? Harker asked, confused. Weren't they supposed to run as far as possible? We reached our hiding place, Seth informed them. Hiding place? I thought we were making a run for it. Caleb asked. The other also looked at him questioning. Yeah, but wouldn't it be a shame to just run away empty-handedly? I thought we should give the citadel a visit. That was right. The citadel and the massive dragon tower were currently buried under the rubble of the collapsed cliff. It was a great time to take a look at what the quest had all been about. Although the dragon was gone, how couldn't there be anything that would make their journey worth it? It's also the last place she will look for us. We can take a look at the place and rest here, and when she really finds out where we are, we can dig straight down and get out of here. Seth excused his action. The bard's words were weirdly compelling, reminding them of the great tower at the shore. It was probably a good place to defend if they could take control of it. With voice of Seth at work, nobody lynched Seth for his greed. Also, Thomas said it's okay. The blacksmith convinced them to take a look of the tower. Of course, Seth had his own considerations. Senior White had mentioned the dragon's treasure. He wanted to see the dragon hoard if Nadina had not completely cleared the place out. An ancient dragon had to have all kinds of good stuff. What dragon would collect trash, right? It was obvious from Tatzel's attitude. Although he was not even a dragon, it was hard to keep him from dragging stuff from Seth's workshop to the vault in the Tower Master's private quarters. Outside of Python was a dark hole. She had freed some space. They only saw the lower corners, but they knew they stood in front of a massive golden gate. How do you get in? It's probably locked. The hero looked at the life-sized graviers on the gates. I mean, do you think she locked it behind her after taking the dragon? We should just try it. Seth shrugged his shoulder and pushed against the gate. I did not budge. See, it's locked, Harker commented smugly. Seth glanced at him. Even if it was locked, Seth still had a solution for that, but he was not ready to give up yet. An 8-meter-tall monkey knight appeared beside him and started pushing together with Seth. Slowly, very slowly, the gate was moving. Harker blushed hard. I thought you liked helping. How about you help pushing? Seth told the embarrassed hero. Python shielded them from the rubbly falling down, as they pushed open the gate just enough for them to enter. For now, you should enter my inventory again, he told Python and packed her away. If she looked for them, the necromancer would look for a giant snake. They couldn't know what kinds of skills she got from the sparks, but in the best case, she wouldn't suspect them here. They would simply close the door, and nobody would be able to find them. Seth was the last one to enter and pushed the door shut behind them. He found everyone standing in a small circle of light. Everyone had used some magic or an item to create a source of light, but they could barely see the outer edges of the gate. The ceiling of the place stayed hidden in shadows. Isn't the door a little small for that massive dragon? Ellie just mused and stared at the several stories high gates. Dragons can change their size. Since they grow all their life, they learn this kind of magic, so they don't have to change their home all the time. Poulter explained knowledgeably. It's true, I also heard of it. It's a highly complicated space-type magic. Twinkle confirmed the dwarf's statement. How do you know that? Ellie asked interestedly. I'm a dwarf. Who do you think builds these kinds of halls? Dragons know jack about architecture and craftsmanship. They are our best customers and worst enemies, the dwarven warrior explained proudly, harvesting an impressed wow from the slime rancher. It made sense to Seth. Who would spend centuries on building an awesome palace if they simply became too big for it? Learning magic to change size seemed like a reasonable decision. Magic to change the size. With Hubert the dimensional merchant as the only thief-like person in the party at the front, they started exploring the wide halls of the Dragon Tower. Someone else already did most of the work for us. Just make sure to follow me closely, he commented. Hubert was able to use his monocle to look out for all kinds of traps. Someone else had come along here before them and disabled many of them. The merchant just had to lead them down a trodden path. In some places, they came close to the walls and found magic lamps, but they didn't seem to function. Even when Megan tried pouring magic power into them, but they only worked for the duration that the archaeology supplied energy. Taking them along as torches was not an option, as it would have activated some traps. Those with night vision like Seth saw other forks in the path, but the party could only follow the cleared path through the darkness. They finally arrived at another huge door. This one was silver. No. This is mithril, the dwarf and Seth both said breathlessly at the same time. It wasn't as big as the front door, but these gates were made of at least several tons of mithril. The shine of the blacksmith's eyes was almost enough to illuminate the full hallway. The wings of the gate stood open, and they could enter without a problem. However, they quickly regretted it, as a wall of stench hit them. Many gagged, the more fragile members, like Rich and Brock, even threw up. What place this became apparent at first glance. The dim light was reflected by mounds of gold in the darkness. It was the door to the treasury and also the tomb of the ancient dragon. Seth could see the whole room as if it was well illuminated. Although the zombie dragon was done, the residue of its rotten body had stayed. An almost black sludge covered a vast amount of the dragon's hoard. It was also the source of the smell. Wow, this looks awesome! Fianus, the bandit lady, exclaimed excitedly. Don't touch that! Nobody touches anything! Seth shouted in a hurry. The bandit instinctively shrunk back. Hey, no need to be so aggressive, there is more than enough for everyone. Harker tried to mediate. Shut up, it's not about that, you dweeb. Everything here is cursed. Seth revealed to them with a heavy voice. Chapter 457. Dragon Curse. Lance of Shortiness, Tainted. Epic, Legendary. Damage, 700. Mag damage, 700. Durability, 450. 1 piercing damage is multiplied by 0.5. 2 plus 20% damage against the divine. 3 increase all attributes by 3. 4 Dragon Curse. 5 broken. 6 broken. The lance Shortiness once used to strike down a great deity and become a legend. The craftsman's name has been lost to time. Item has been completely corroded by a strong curse and is filled with the dead mana of a dragon. Whoever takes ownership of the items will be hit by the dragon curse. As expected from a dragon, the room was filled with epic, relic, and legendary rated items. In the Horde's prime, the dragon would have been able to equip a whole party with legendary equipment. Seth's eyes sparkled like diamonds. It was a shame he could not touch them. Looking over the room with Blacksmith's eyes. All items were in a similar condition to the lance. No matter what. Weapons, armor, or jewelry, everything was corroded and damaged by the dragon's residue and the curse. Although not corroded, even the gold and silver coins littered on the ground and in mounds everywhere were cursed with the same curse. The dragon curse Seth knew from fairy tales had the effect that someone that stole from a dragon's hoard would turn into a dragon himself. Obviously, it didn't work this way here. This curse was a kind of corruption in body and mind. One will resemble a dragon in greed and form was what the description said. It did not specify what this corruption was any further, but this was enough for the blacksmith to know that it was not something good. While he was explaining the results of the appraisal, everyone kept backing away from the treasure, leaving Seth as the one standing the closest. No wonder this stuff is still here. Not even the necromancer girl dared to take more than the corpse. Rich mumbled. It's a shame we can't take any of this. I guess we came here for nothing. Hubert mumbled. Says who? I would have expected more from you as a businessman, Hubert. Seth scolded the dimensional merchant. Didn't you yourself mention that all of this is cursed? Who would be crazy enough to mess with a dragon's curse? The hero asked. He couldn't really follow. Well, first of all, we have the giant mithril gates. Those aren't cursed. Those are already worth coming here. Then there are many more passages in this tower. Seth explained. Several tons of mithril was nothing to be looked down upon and they had come past other passages. The kind of treasure something like a dragon's library could hold was hard to imagine. Only thinking of the dragon's treasure was short-sighted. Lastly, me. I'm crazy enough. And I take your question as you forfeiting any shares on it. Fine, the hero answered huffily. How are you going to take it? The dwarven warrior asked interested. It explicitly says that you have to take ownership of the item, to be hit by the curse. What if I do this? He mused and used pyrokinesis to throw a ball of soul flames at a mountain of coins. The blacksmith kept fueling the fire as the coins started to quickly liquefy. There were no change in his status or evil curse that hit him. He had destroyed the cursed items with a cleansing fire, the difference was huge. Seth checked the puddle of alloy on the floor. Draconic electrum, crafting material, rare. An alloy of gold and silver mixed with a small residue of a dragon's mana. Has some affinity with dragon magic and mana. Dragons and related species will have a slight interest in items made of this material. It had worked. Seth's other idea would have been for golems to take the stuff along. Since the golems did not count as living beings, they couldn't have possessions, right? Did it work? Poulter asked the blacksmith interested. Yeah, the curse option is gone when the item is destroyed. However, I feel conflicted about destroying legendary items. Seth lamented. He also couldn't take possession of them. It was questionable whether he could use the golems to take or move these items. They counted as items. An item can't own things, right? To lift that curse it would probably take a legendary priest. A legendary priest to lift a legendary curse on a legendary item, seems fitting, right? Poulter commented. Seth nodded. The problem was that they had little understanding of what legend even meant. For items, it was clear in the description, that had to be involved in someone's rise to a legend. Not even the superior purification of his golden fleece was able to do anything. The blacksmith looked over to Yvette. A saintess seemed pretty legendary to him. Don't look at me like that. Nothing in my status says legend. Also, I serve the god of respite. Not exactly specialized in lifting curses, she answered his pending question. Yet, it was clear that there was something special about becoming a legend and none of them had done it yet. Let's just put them off to the side for now and decide later, he finally said. He had been a little apprehensive about having the golems touch the gold and items, so he had Twinkle and Yvette on standby in case he was suddenly hit by the curse, but nothing of the sort happened. It was as Seth suspected. The golems moving stuff did not count as taking possession of the item. Seth did not hold back and summoned the furnace of his spirit smithy. While the golems kept feeding on the gold and silver coins, he concentrated on controlling the furnace. Focused Zion on the molten liquid, Seth found similar energy he had once seen in ancient bronze and knew from celestial bronze. It was foreign energy clinging to the material, this had to be the dragon mana from the curse. With the destruction of the item, the curse lost its meaning, but the energy stayed attached to the material itself. Sorting gold and silver coins beforehand, made it easier to make pure bars of draconic gold and draconic silver, rare-rated materials with the same description as the electron alloy. It became Poulter's task to keep filling mold with the molten material to make bars. However, after working so long with the furnace and attaining the trait kin of fire, Seth had gotten the hang of some tricks. Back in the day when he just started off, he would burn off material if he failed. Now he used it to his advantage. By burning off material, he managed to concentrate the magic in the material. There was some material loss, but Seth did not care about some common gold or silver evaporating. That's how aloof he had become. Dragon gold, crafting material, rare. Gold filled with a dragon's mana. Has a good affinity with dragon magic and mana. Dragons and related species will have increased interest in items made of this material. Dragon silver, crafting material, rare. Pure silver filled with a dragon's mana. Has a high affinity for dragon magic and mana. Dragons and related species will have great interest in items made of this material. His trick showed a massive improvement in quality, although the rating did not change. It was surprising that the dragon silver was even better than the dragon gold. While Seth and Poulter were occupied with the cursed hoard, Hubert had taken the cue and started trying to unlock the other passages. Had Seth known what he was going to do, he might not have lent him a Gomini. Bravely, the little golem walked ahead, while Hubert had him activate the less dangerous traps on the snaking paths through the corridor. Although the golem could regenerate and wasn't destroyed, seeing it crushed, burned, sliced, pierced, disintegrated by several kinds of magic, and so on and so forth would have been too cruel even for the blacksmith. Ellie, the only other person who would have stood up for the right of the cute golem, was also not there to stop these cruel acts. There were only Hubert, Megan, and Caleb who say the golem was no more than a tool. They watched it waddle into the darkness and followed it to explore the depths of the Dragon Tower. Chapter 458. Reinforcements arrive. He stepped out of the portal. Night had fallen, but he could still perfectly assess their surroundings. The first thing his eyes laid upon was a city in ruins. A part of it looked freshly burnt down, while the rest were century-old ruins. Not much more than foundations and some broken walls, overgrown with grass and weeds. Lord Astera, we found the 3 recorders but there are no signs of the participants, one of the knights at his side reported to him. Moments later the scouts that had entered first returned with news. My lord, the whole cliff has inexplicably collapsed. However, there are no signs of magic that could have caused this kind of collapse. We found the crushed bodies of undead and what looks like an armored giant among the rubble, he reported quickly and concisely. The participants. We found no signs of them. The dragon. The necromancer is currently fighting. This time I will crush you, a hysteric scream echoed across the ruined city. Andrei lifted one of his eyebrows and looked at the shadow scout questioningly. Correcting. The necromancer has freed the dragon and returned, the scout said, slightly embarrassed. Yes, I can see that. Inform the rest of the search part to keep some distance. I will engage the girl. Excuse me if I'm being disrespectful, but, is that wise, sir? The scout asked, troubled. Don't worry, boy. I already fought with real dragons and grown-up champions. A fledgling on an undead dragon is the least of our problems. Just make sure to find the participants so we can get out of here, he assured the scout and set off to face the rotten beast and the dragon it was riding. The place shook and dust fell from the ceiling of the treasure chamber. Seth didn't take note of it. He was focused on smelting the last kilograms of silver the golems had filled in the furnace. All of the equipment that seemed too precious or couldn't be smelted down was piled up in one corner of the room. There were a few legendary items and items made of leather or other monster materials that couldn't be molten down. Seth was deliberating to summon Cerberus and have the golem disassemble them, but the blacksmith had to take the situation in Delta into consideration. He had left the golem there to take care of production, otherwise, Whedon and Hone, the 2 dwarven blacksmiths, might overwork themselves. Except for the legendary stuff, the other things were not really that attractive. Seth didn't lack epic leathers or monster materials. He would have to leave those things here. The only silver lining was, that he had no idea what kind of power those items had in their prime. That way he did not feel that bad about the loss. The biggest grieving was the dragon scales the golems pulled from the black sludge. Those were actually legendary materials, but so heavily cursed that Seth didn't dare to even touch them. While smelting the treasure, he kept wrecking his brain about a way to take them along. The tower shook again and Poulter almost dropped a rack of freshly filled molds. The precious dragon silver had almost spilled all over the floor. The quakes had kept growing stronger. Seth, did you notice the quake? Ellie came running in. Yeah, couldn't I? Poulter almost fell over, commented with an accusing glance at the dwarf. A dwarven warrior almost falling over from a little earthquake. Do you think it's the dragon? Ellie asked, slightly concerned. I don't think so. That's not the sound of something digging, could that be? It's a fight, someone completed his question with a confident answer. Thomas had appeared behind them at some point. Oh, hey. Weren't you sitting with the others at the camp? What made you come here? The blacksmith asked, slightly surprised. They had set up a camp in the hallway outside the treasury. Except for the blacksmith and Poulter, who were busy smelting the valuable, and Hubert's group, who was off exploring the place, everyone else was resting there. I came to tell you to hurry. We will soon have to leave, he said with a friendly smile. Leave? You mean our reinforcement is currently fighting the dragon? The fortune teller shook his head. I can't be certain. All I know is that we should leave soon. Okay, tell the other I will finish up here. Seth agreed. He was almost done anyway. After the last few times of filling the furnace and packing up the finished metal bars, Poulter and Seth joined the rest at the campfire. The fortune teller was just occupied with throwing and reading some die-shaped bones, while everyone else was packing up. It seemed that the fact that he had agreed to leave was enough for the other to get ready, too. How is it? He asked Thomas, who was reading the bones. The man suddenly held up 3 fingers and started silently counting down. When he bent the last finger, they heard footsteps from the corridor. Hubert and his group came back with a quick gait. It seemed like they were in a hurry. Oh great! You are already getting ready to leave. Perfect. We are also done over there. We should get out of here quickly, the dimensional merchant said, obviously nervous. What did you do over there? Seth asked suspiciously. Arim, he stammered. An infernal screech from the depth of the corridor answered the question his place. Let's just say we found the library and tried some stuff we should have waited with. Can we go now? The merchant explained and tried to rush to the entrance. Seth looked down the hallway they came from. With night vision and clairvoyance he could see light fall out of a door at the far end of the hallway. The silhouette of wriggling tentacles or worms gushing out from the door convinced him. Yeah, let's go. The camp was packed up and the team followed the merchant with quick steps back to the exit. Seth brought out his deity golem and they all boarded the Python Express back to the surface. Their destination was clear. The point where Seth had left the recorders. It's about 20 m until we reach the destination. Python informed Seth and halted. Thanks. This is where we go by foot, guys, Seth announced. Aren't we going all the way with your golem? Caleb asked. I don't want to reveal my Python. We will go the rest by mining, the blacksmith told them and brought out Iapeto's pickaxe. When they exited, Seth stashed away the giant snake and they were left in a dark hole in the ground. With quick hacking motions, Seth started mining towards the surface. Everyone else followed behind the blacksmith through the wide tunnel he was digging through the earth. Just moments later fresh air flowed into the tunnel, and everyone had a breath of relief. It was night outside, but before Seth could climb out of the hole, saw the light of the stars sparkling on a bunch of blades pointed at him. Arim, we came in peace, honorable surface dweller, the bard asked insecurely. It's the participants, we found them, one of the knights that surrounded the hole called out, and the swords were put away. Again, the whole place shook, from the clash of titans in the distance. The knight helped them climb out of the tunnel. The sight Seth witnessed when he looked at the fight humbled him. One side was the dragon Kalsmere. It seemed even bigger than before. On its back was the necromancer Nadina with a purple halo behind her back. Her beast was enveloped in all kinds of auras that originated from her halo and kept flowing into the dragon. If this was her being serious, then Python would not have had a chance. On the other side was a single man. He was huge and had a wild silver beard and hair. He was half naked, and his upper body was covered in runic tattoos that gave the impression to glow. With his roar, he summoned the colossal phantasm of a golden lion that easily rivaled the dragon. With every move of the man, the giant figure moved too. When he punched, the lion swiped and a huge gash appeared on the zombie dragon's rotten skin and exposed bones. It was not just an illusion, the image of a giant lion had a corporeal quality that enabled the man to have the upper hand in this face-off. The rest of the team also left their burrow and stared at the fight in the sky with shocked expressions. Okay, did you gawk enough? One of the knights in a more colorful armor asked the group. Lord Astera is not fighting for fun, we must get you to safety quickly. I'm Captain Lingle of the Imperial Guard of Krina. Prince Hardwig sent us under the decree of the Emperor to get as many of you back alive, as quickly as possible, he explained and showed the scroll of the Imperial Decree. As Ori races, they had little knowledge about the customs of the Empire, but the archaeologist Megan was able to guarantee that it was really an Imperial decree from Krina. After this was ascertained, Lingle gestured for them to follow him. Although Seth would have thought the knight would be annoyed by their distrust, he could actually see a proud smile on the knight captain's face. The bard did not know how he should feel to be treated like a pupil that did well on a test. Sir, what about the evaluation quest? Caleb asked the knight captain, earning some askant glances from the other. Not even Seth cared about the quest anymore. Well, maybe because he had made a huge gain here, but still. Do not worry about the quest. You will be sufficiently rewarded for your deeds. Lingle guaranteed and led them to the portal. A blue disc swirling with brilliant white lights was floating in the air, where Seth had positioned the recorder golems. One by one, they entered the portal. With a last woeful glance at the dragon and its bones, the blacksmith stepped through the portal. Chapter 459. Brunch. What greeted Seth the moment he stepped through the gate was Mina's tear-stained face that directly went in for a kiss. It was a quick and hurried kiss while her quivering hands were framing his face. The next moment they wandered all over him to make sure he was alive and not hurt anywhere. You are back. You are back. I was so worried. She sobbed. Seeing the usually strong beast woman in tears like this ached his heart. Instinctively he pulled her into an unyielding hug. He pressed her soft quivering body against himself and stroked her hair and kept soothingly speaking to her until the sobbing slowly subsided. Wiping away the tears from her cheek, he gazed into the big clear eyes and gave her a deep kiss. "Never leave like that again," she whispered. "Never," he promised, and then they kissed again. "Oh, come on. Is this really necessary? Get a room." Rich couldn't take it anymore, being fed dog food like this. Looking up, he found the single dogs of the party giving him reproachful looks. Even Ellie looked away awkwardly. Lena and Hardwig, who had also been waiting for them, made complicated faces. The expressions of the knights around varied from reproaching to touching and supporting. However, they all tried to keep a straight face. But he wasn't the only target of the critique. Marcel and Elsa, the two lovers divided by Seth's timely murder of the latter, had similarly sunken into a world of their own. Rich's outcry of frustration interrupted their happiness and they looked a little embarrassed. Seth only grinned mischievously and went back in for an even more romantic kiss. Mina made no attempt to resist his wandering hands. After all, it had been almost a month for her, too, since the last time they were together. Meow. Finn also missed Seth. "Stop hogging, Mina." Finn finally lost her patience. Doing all people present a favor and separating the two lovebirds. Finn was worried, too, she said after clamping to Seth's cheek. "Sorry," Finn the blacksmith apologized and soothed the little fairy, too. This time it was primarily Princess Lena looking at him with reproach. "Okay, we dawdled enough. We have several healers here that will make sure you are all healthy. We also prepared rooms for you to rest." Hardwig finally dispersed their awkward assembly. After the participants left, only Lena and Hardwig and some of the knights guarding the portal were left in the courtyard. "He is really a telltale bard and powerful, too. Are you sure he is also a blacksmith on top of that?" Hardwig asked a question that had been bugging him for some time. He just couldn't help but doubt his sister's words. "Yes, he even is a blacksmith, before he is a bard. Remember whose recorders sent the last broadcast? How would a bard take control of the recorder golems?" she asked smugly. In that case, we have to make sure to keep a good relationship with him. You would do well, to tone down your weird obsession with that fairy. She obviously likes him," the prince mused. What are you talking about?" Lena tried to deny it embarrassedly. "Oh please, do you think you could hide it from me? I knew you your whole life. There's no way I couldn't see the expression you were making just now," he said with a smug smile of his own. "Then what am I supposed to do? I'm not telling you to get rid of your feeling, but, if you can't dial it down to the level of friendship, maybe you could join," he suggested. "What? No, Finn and Seth are not even in that kind of relationship." "Oh, my poor innocent baby," he started patting her head. Although the blacksmith still seems a little opposed to it, the beast girl seems fine with it. I don't think it will take long for his eyebrows jump to indicate what he meant. "And if you manage to join, you can get closer to the fairy, and I wouldn't mind a talented blacksmith as a brother-in-law," he said, and hurriedly ran away as Lena started swinging her fists at him. Her face was red like a tomato as she shooed her brother away in embarrassment. The returnees did not go back to the guest mansions. The rooms that had been prepared for them were within the main palace, protected by the best security measures. Everyone had their own rooms. However, the rooms of Seth and his friends were thoughtfully arranged to be close to each other. Somehow everyone wanted to follow them into the blacksmith's room to catch up, but Seth quickly slipped in with Mina and locked the door. The couple wanted to do some catching up on their own. Had he missed his friends and family? Sure. But he didn't want to deal with the aftermath right now. He wanted to relax and enjoy some quality time. People had to do their catching up without them. A day later he woke up to a familiar scene. Before he could follow his urges and continue catching up, someone knocked on the door. "Seth Smith. His Highness Prince Hardwig asks for your attendance. He invites you to have brunch with the rest of the returned participants and their backers," the voice said from outside. The blacksmith looked at the naked girl in his arms who was also looking up to him. Her gaze signaled to him that she didn't mind going for a snack before continuing. His stomach audibly gave its opinion, 2-3 in favor. The decision was unanimous. It had been some time since he had the chance to really eat his fill at someone else's expense. The couple washed up, got dressed, and soon joined the servant waiting outside for them. He guided them through the luxuriously decorated palace to an expansive dining room. In the middle stood a long table. It was filled with food to the point that the tabletop was bending under the weight. A sight that filled Seth's heart with excitement and his belly with butterflies. Arranged around the table were roughly 20 to 30 chairs. He recognized the people he had traveled with for the past few days. In addition, there were some unfamiliar faces and some people he categorized as probably royals. He recognized Hardwig and Lena, the others all had similarities to the two, so they were probably princes, too. Seth and Mina sat down beside Ellie, who was already seated at the table. Hardwig gave him a nod and stood up. "Welcome all of you who have managed to make it back. First of all, I wish to apologize to you in the name of the Empire. Your lives were endangered because of our negligence in security. We will sort out your contributions and the reparations at a later time. For now, I hope you can relax and enjoy the meal prepared by the best Imperial chefs." He held a short speech before opening the brunch. Glad that Hardwig did not dwell on the complicated stuff, Seth decided not to hold back on the eating. It was as the prince had said, it tasted heavenly. The meats were tender and juicy and the vegetables almost sweet. Seth tasted everything, and the food kept melting in his mouth. Despite people slowly finishing one by one, the food kept vanishing from the table with increasing speed. He had kept some consideration for the other participants, but he didn't hold back as there were less and less competitors. Only one adversary kept facing Seth in this battle. Each dish he grabbed, each bite he took, was mirrored by his opponent. Finn the voracious, devourer of muffins, and anything sweet challenged him for the crown. The chefs had thrown in the towel and the heat of their battle rose as the food supply was cut. Finally, their hands met upon the last chicken drum on the table. Silence ensued. The crowd was shocked when their eyes met and metaphorically sparks flew. The intensity of their duel was tangible like a thick smell in the air. Who would concede this last morsel? As Seth stared the tiny Finn down, who just waited for a chance to devour this drumstick like a rabid Spitz, he realized something. He was not hungry enough to contend with his family for a drumstick. His grasp on the drumstick weakened, leaving it to the fairy brute. The brute however looked at him in surprise, unsure whether this was a trick or true compassion. "We could share." And share they did. The uncontested destroyers of this meal, who had ruined everyone's appetites, who had fought together and against each other finally became comrades and each ate one half of the drum in peace. "Dave Fuchs," one of the princes couldn't help but exclaim. Chapter 460. Meeting the losers. Only after stuffing himself did Seth direct some more attention to the others at the table. Having just shared a touching moment with Finn, the rest of the table was looking at them flabbergasted. Only Mina was chuckling beside him. Even Ellie and the other he knew for a little longer were put off. It was the first time seeing the blacksmith's unrestrained eating. Recently he had been holding back in public, but after the kind of journey he had been through, he didn't care about his image. He felt warm and all around satisfied, not minding the glances of others. Competing with the fairy was refreshing and reminded him of the days when they were traveling together. At the head of the table, Hardwig cleared his throat. Since everyone finished eating, he looked at Seth and Finn questioningly, but neither denied his assumption. "I would like to talk with everyone about the future proceedings." After giving everyone some time to rest, the prince asked for everyone to participate in a short interview, so they could sort out what had happened in Kavati-Kuinan after the signal was cut. It was not specifically the group that fought Nadina that was interviewed. Although Seth and the others were the only ones that got close to the citadel and fought the necromancer, they were not the only ones that survived. During the time Seth was asleep, the Empire managed to bring back the rest of 2 more teams. Nadina had lied a little in her speech for the dramatic effect. Just like how Seth and Poulter were able to repel the attack of the undead sparks, other teams also had members that managed to survive and save some of their people. The necromancers' rushed actions to try and take down several teams at once were what ultimately enabled them to survive. On that note, what is going on over there? Did Lord Asterum manage to defeat the zombie dragon? Ben Harker asked. Since they managed to locate and bring back more survivors, the fight must have ended. Seth had also wanted to ask, but for a different reason. He was more interested in whether they managed to secure the dragon materials. If they really acquired them, it meant to Seth that they had a way to deal with the dragon's curse. However, Hardwig's face derailed for a moment, before he could manage his facial expression again. No. Unfortunately, the battle was interrupted when the blood sun suddenly rose. Lord Astera had to shield our people and return. As for the dragon and Nadina Durnham, we don't know the current status. Hardwig admitted seriously. Seth was a little disappointed that the dragon got away, but he was more impressed with Lord Astera. He had witnessed the blood sun from afar and heard what it did to people. For this man to not only resist, but even shield that many people from the god's wrath was a testament to the man's strength. The table became a little depressed, thinking that there was a chance that the girl was still out there somewhere. After all, she could haunt them once they returned home. The only one not worried in the least was Seth. He was actually looking forward to it. So what if she had a zombie dragon? He had Alzalsar, a centuries-old sorceress who thirsted for the chance to kill dragons. Nadina appearing with that dragon at his doorstep was nothing short of delivering him materials for free. Looking around, the ones looking the gloomiest or most angered were actually the people he identified as royals. Seth had not really listened when Hardwigg introduced them all, but there was one thing the bard could ascertain from their expression. These were the true losers of this time's evaluation. They had lost some or even all of their promising talents. Even if there were compensations, those would be no substitute for talented people that could have facilitated the growth and prosperity of the province. They had technically lost everything that could have helped them distinguish themselves and with it their chances to inherit an independent title. Only the ones who had at least some people return looked less agitated. Lena looked completely fine. After all, she had not lost anyone. Do not worry, we have people searching for her, Hardwigg assured them. The last point he talked about was the remuneration. It would take a few days to tally everything, and the Empire would then inform them of their opportunities. With that, he released them to do whatever they wanted. Servants would approach them later to make a date for the interviews. Once the prince finished and they were released, Lena approached him. He also saw that the other royals approached the participants after they all stood up. Seth, Mina, Finn, how are you? She greeted. Good, good. What are they doing? He asked the princess curiously. Oh, well. You could call it headhunting? They are trying to scout some of the survivors. Without talents, they will have a hard time, which is why I'm so glad you and the others all made it back, she explained. Well, not thanks to that dumb hero you threw at us, Seth commented dryly. Come on, I already explained to you why, she answered embarrassedly. I didn't feel any of the hero luck and the boost it gave the party wasn't that overwhelming. It depends on the affinity of the party with the hero, but... True, his luck was probably to have such a good party, she admitted. Even the princess had not expected the hero to be such a big problem. She was glad the group dynamic had fixed itself along the way and she apologized for not listening to him. She was awfully cordial all of a sudden. Let's forget about the uncomfortable things. Let's talk about the rewards. Seth changed the topic. I can't tell you much. Once everything was tallied, you will have a chance to choose your rewards accordingly. I know that. I was talking about something else. You mentioned we would get part of the proceeds for the broadcasts from the channels that bought the rights, no? Seth asked with a smile. Arim, yes, but why do you ask? Lena asked confusedly. Well, I used Ellie's and my recorders to broadcast the epic battle. Shouldn't that get a lot of views? Of course, I want my share, the blacksmith said triumphantly. You are admitting that you messed around with the recording equipment? The princess asked as if she caught onto something. Yeah, so what? Really, I just started working on golems some 3 months ago and I can mess with your awesome technology. Shouldn't you be a little ashamed? No wonder the enemy managed to hack you, he answered nonchalantly. I will have to look into it, she gave an exasperated. Anyway, I came because our researchers wanted to talk with you about the staff you lent us. They are done and hope to look at more things. Oh, really? Seth asked, pleasantly surprised. However, the blacksmith was not as enthusiastic about their method. The reason was the change the weapons had undergone after the last battle. When the others returned the lent weapons to him, they had suddenly attained a description. It was a little glitched and incomplete, however, it gave some information. Poleaxe of chains. Damage, 2500. Mag damage, 1000. Durability. 1 active skill, silence. 2 active skill, bind. 3 70% chance to cause stun/confusion on hit. 4 1% chance of metallification. 5 -15% on all of an opponent's stats. 6-7- Forged from the body of a living angel by craftsman Smith during a chaotic battle. Still contains some of the angel's power and its guardian deity's divinity. Similarly, the sword, the spear, daggers, helmet, and the shield had acquired a similar description after being used in battle. The abilities of the weapons were all quite similar. However, only the sword and the shield had revealed their special powers in the description. The sword was able to not only force people to answer questions but also had a small chance to automatically force a slave curse onto opponents that have been completely subdued and had no will to resist anymore. On the other hand, the shield was able to create a domain that blocked the usage of skills and gave the user control over those that were reflected in the shield's polished surface. It also had the small chance to turn those that were reflected in it into metal, after their attack was blocked. The blacksmith concluded that, although the system could not immediately come up with a description, one would be slowly generated as the weapons were actually used in battle. Leaving the troubleshooting to the people of the Empire was fine, but Seth liked to get an actual item description using his blacksmith's eyes. Okay, let's go and meet them. Seth with a smile. There was still one item he wanted to let them research. One he did not dare to use himself.